Carrie Eurodyne got what he wanted. Fame, all his own. A fortune, all his to spend. Admiration on a worldwide scale. But was it, in the end, worth it? Like many stories in Cyberpunk 2077, the answer is complicated. Before researching for this video and replaying Carrie's story, and looking deeper into his romance, I never used to think much of Carrie, but now I can't help but see this appearance-wise shallow rocker boy as one of the more believable characters that V can meet in Night City. Hey yo, it's Liddy, and welcome to Shaped by Stories, where we unpack how characters shape stories and how stories shape us. Let's get into it. Carrie Eurodyne was born on April 7th, 1988, in Masbate in the Philippines. Many longtime fans of cyberpunk lore believe Carrie Eurodyne is just a stage name, not unlike Johnny Silverhand, but we don't really have an idea of what Carrie's birth name could be. Carrie is also of at least partial Filipino descent, and we can see his culture reflected in his tattoos, and also in his spirituality. Carrie's early years aren't really spelled out to us. We don't actually have a solid confirmation of when Carrie met Johnny. Carrie says, while sipping his coffee with V in 2077, that he and Johnny used to come over to the Caliente from across the street and get coffee and food and all that. Even Johnny has a shadow of a recollection of this, as he says the Caliente is familiar. Basically, as Carrie says, it was one of the only places they could afford to buy food after spending all their money on instruments. But when you look at what is across the street from the Caliente in 2077, it is the Rancho Coronado High School, which leads me to believe that while Johnny was born in Texas and enlisted with the military at the age of 15, circa 2003, and while Carrie was born in Masbate and moved to Night City at an unspecified time, it's possible that these two met in their preteen years while attending school. But I have to admit that Rancho Coronado High School might not have been in that location in the late 90s, when Johnny and Carrie would have been that age to attend. Maybe another building stood there, maybe they were older. The timeline of Carrie's story is unclear. The other possibility, though, of them being kind of adults sitting in front of the high school it's a choice, for sure. It reminds me of the crackheads that used to camp out in the crappy motel across the street from my high school. Anyway, what we know for certain about Carrie and Johnny's past is that Samurai was formed after Johnny came back from war. Johnny and Carrie wanted to change the world through music, and the two best friends worked themselves to the bone to build up their reputation. Both Johnny and Carrie had issues with the system of the world they lived in, although Johnny and Carrie both went about this message in different ways. While building up the band, Carrie used to work on boats as a server or a maintenance worker, writing songs and composing music in his spare time. It was during one of these stints that he found the time to write Samurai's hit song, Bleed the Beat. Carrie can tell V that while this song was perceived as yet another sticking it to the corpo overlords by the vast majority of his fans, it was far more meaningful to him than that. Carrie's dedication to making music was always a big part of his life, and he says that he composed on that boat until his fingers bled, making sure not to muck up all the fine linens and the champagne flutes with his raw, overworked hands. Blood, sweat, and tears for his art. Bleed the Beat was an ode to this, specifically bleeding in service to the rich. It wasn't just about anger at corpos for him, it was about the unavoidable hardship that came with being a bottom-of-the-barrel kid. Whether Carrie grew up in Rancho Coronado or not, he likely didn't come from a very well-off background. That he says he and Johnny spent everything they had on their musical instruments in their attempts to make it big and to make money off music, that just shows that they were not drowning in eddies. Some say the best artists are born of hardship, and I think that's true for Carrie in this sense. It certainly is for Johnny, and they're very similar in many ways. This made them both a potent artistic duo, but it also made them a very toxic mess. Samurai was coined so by band member Nancy Hartley, or as we know her in 2077, Bess Isis. Nancy had her own interesting reasons for picking the name Samurai, involving history, philosophy, and irony. We'll delve deeper into her in the Samurai video. Whereas Johnny and Carrie, they didn't care about her deeper reasons, they just liked how the band name sounded and how the logo looked. Samurai played at cheap back alley clubs for a long time, including their first official gig at the Red Dirt Bar in Rancho. At some point in 2003, at the Rainbow Cadenza Club, they were picked up by an agent and signed to Universal Recording. Finally, on a label, Johnny and Carrie toured like the musicians they had aspired to be, with bandmates Nancy, Denny, and Henry. Despite the band's impeccable, almost overnight success, Carrie and Johnny, both very passionate in their own ways about their art, began to clash. While both these strong personalities wanted to change the world through music, for Johnny, this whole project with Samurai was always more about the message he was trying to spread, about waking people up. Johnny had his own political messages that he was willing to spread through even extreme means. And more often than not, Johnny got his way. He did get into trouble and he quickly became a controversial figure. But for Carrie, he never really wanted to step on anybody else's toes, as Johnny says. And Carrie was also more focused on the music he was making. Yes, the message did mean something to him, but the whole value of rebellion and tearing down the corpo overlords was never as big a focus for him as being artistic and creative was. This is one of the major reasons why Carrie and Johnny had a lot of issues with each other as time went on. Carrie tried to leave Samurai numerous times over the years, wanting to do his own thing creatively, but something, likely Johnny, always pulled him back. I don't think it's a crazy thing to assume that Johnny and Carrie had a very toxic friendship. Johnny is a very narcissistic person, he's very manipulative, and he's very self-centered. And while I definitely think Carrie is self-centered and can be considered manipulative as well, I do think that Johnny did yank Carrie's feelings around in a really unfair way to keep his most musically gifted bandmate around. It is heavily hinted at throughout Carrie's quests that Carrie was sort of in love with Johnny, or at least the idea of Johnny. Johnny basically sort of spells out, at least Relic Johnny does, that he was kind of aware of Carrie's feelings for him. I think as much as Carrie wanted to be as creatively bold as Johnny could be, and as much as he wanted to emulate him sort of, to have that star power, I think he did develop some really complex feelings for him over time on a different level. And there's some conflicting information that poses the possibility that Johnny may have used that to keep Carrie around. Johnny says in Cyberpunk 2077 that he never slept with Carrie. He can say this in the joking way to Rogue at the drive-in by saying he should have slept with Carrie. Another time he says the main problem with anything happening between him and Carrie is that Carrie had a penis. But in one of the guidebooks for the actual game, Cyberpunk 2077, there's a handbook that talks of Johnny having slept with Carrie, and almost everybody else in the band at some point or other, including Henry. One does have to remember that the Johnny in V's head doesn't have exactly the same memories as maybe original Johnny would. He also doesn't entirely recall the importance of the Caliente, while Carrie recalls his time there with Johnny wistfully. There's a lot of inconsistencies peppered throughout the game when it comes to Johnny's memory, that feel very intentional of the writers, I think, to highlight that Baby Johnny, as I like to call him, is a different personality entirely from original Johnny. The Relic cannot create exact copies, I think. I think it's entirely possible that original Johnny had a more intimate relationship with Carrie than we are told. Not necessarily that Johnny had feelings for Carrie, I don't think he did, but Carrie is canonically bi, so it's not like the source material was ever shy about showing characters, especially men, with a variety of complex sexualities that are otherwise not as common in media today. Either way, even if Relic Johnny is recalling things correctly and nothing at all happened like that between the two, I think Johnny did know about Carrie's feelings, as he basically admits as much, and I wouldn't put it past Johnny to have used those feelings to lure Carrie back into the band and not leave. That was until 2008. Samurai broke up for a lot of reasons, honestly. There was a lot of interband conflict between probably all of the members. But the straw that broke the camel's back was when Nancy, after admitting to her bandmates that her husband was abusing her, actually ended up killing him in self-defense when he went to beat her again. She pushed him out the window of their apartment. Johnny and Carrie, setting their own differences aside to protect Nancy, nearly arrived to deal with her husband themselves, but she just beat them to it. Nancy was then arrested and sentenced to prison for 7 months, and Samurai fell apart without her. Ultimately, it's said that Johnny's departure was what ended Samurai as a whole, which definitely sounds like Johnny stopping Carrie from leaving the band for as long as Johnny wanted the band to exist, but then as soon as Johnny was done and he didn't have any investments in it, he just left. Carrie and Johnny both embarked on solo careers, but for a time it was hard for Carrie to really find his voice after the breakup of Samurai. He'd always felt like he was living in the shadow of Silverhand, and while I do think that could be because, at the time, Johnny was the more polarizing, controversial figure, I think Carrie was also torn between exploring his own identity, as well as almost emulating Johnny's a bit. I think Carrie struggled with the confidence one needs to really explore your own road creatively. This could be something Carrie's always struggled with, but given Johnny's overpowering, domineering nature, it's possible that Johnny would dismiss and put down a lot of Carrie's other ideas, simply because they were maybe different from what Johnny wanted to do. After the breakup, Carrie spent 2 years back home on Masbate, doing some soul-searching and trying to find his footing again until 2010. When Carrie really kicked off his solo career. Johnny and Carrie did still talk despite their past conflicts and despite the band breakup. They actually bought the Grand Illusion Club in Night City around 2012, where they had an open mic night to give undiscovered talent a chance to make themselves known. Johnny and Carrie probably got along a bit better with the space that they had from one another, and they even, on occasion, apparently toured together. So this next part is interesting. From what I could find, those flashbacks we see of Johnny the night Alt was taken by Arasaka, Johnny was actually playing solo at the Hammer, not with Samurai. That's a blip in the memory, apparently. I mean, maybe Johnny was doing a joint show with Carrie, but it's not confirmed. I'm pretty sure all the Samurai band members are there in the flashback we see in the game. And it's also not necessarily accurate that Johnny was performing with Samurai before he left to destroy the towers. That's also up in the air. Johnny's disappearance was very hard on Carrie, given the hot and cold nature of their friendship and the depth of his feelings for Johnny. It probably sucked, too, that Johnny's fate remained a mystery for basically 50 years after the fall of the towers. While Carrie couldn't get Johnny out of his head completely, he did do his best to move on and make a name for himself. He became a household name, and he had countless hits in his biggest years. Many of his songs continued to speak of that anti-corporate sentiment, of criticizing the unfair system they lived in, while still keeping in mind what was popular and trendy in music at the time. You can't ever please everybody, and I have a feeling Carrie was really trying to, and that he was successful and did manage to make money off it. That says a lot about his talents and abilities to blend all these things together and make art that became world famous. Carrie's success far exceeded the success of the band that he started out with. Many describe Carrie as having real talent, not like the terrorist hack that was Johnny Silverhand. It's interesting to see how, Johnny, who was a bigger deal at the time, is now viewed by more music critics in 2077 as not being that musically talented. It's interesting to see that Carrie, probably after hearing a lot of criticism from Johnny, is probably eating up all the positive feedback that he got in his heyday from people who are recognizing that he's very talented on his own. And while you might think that this praise puffed Carey up and made him more confident overall, in the end, it was ultimately very hollow for him. It wasn't as fulfilling as perhaps Carey had imagined it would be to be a successful rock star. Carey eventually settled down with a woman named Louise and had 2 children, Kim and Ted. But unlike his music career at the time, this went downhill. Carey does tend to have a pattern of putting his career first before even a romantic relationship with V. This could be a relatively new thing in his life, but I have a feeling this pattern goes back a long way. Carey seems like a very lonely guy who struggles to maintain personal relationships. We'll get into that in a bit, but Carey lost a lot in his divorce, and his relationship with his kids was never the same. So by time we meet Carey, he is a lone rocker boy, outwardly expressing happiness at the creative freedom his family-free life has given him. But inwardly, quietly, at least I think, he was screaming. Relic Johnny, or Baby Johnny, has a lot of character development to do in the latter half of Cyberpunk 2077, unless you choose to avoid those quests. And part of that optional personal development is that Johnny wants to do better by those he considers friends than original Johnny did. The last person on that short list is Carey Uridine. Johnny is a bit concerned as he's heard Carey's had a recent suicide attempt, and he's also read some articles highlighting his alleged depression. And so, off he goes to play the liaison in this very strange reunion because Johnny is a tech ghost. And Carey is an 89-year-old man who looks like he's 50-something. It's crazy what they can do in these days. Carey's also been in the music biz for potentially 70+ years, too, so yeah, most of his life, which is crazy to think about. He's got a career that has far surpassed Johnny's, Samurai's, and probably all of Carey's own expectations. He's been living the high life from his villa in the North Oak Hills of Night City, but his life is anything but happy when you actually look at the inside of it. The first thing we notice is how off Carey sounds on the intercom at the gate, probably drunk and sleep-deprived. But as you enter his property, I gotta say, they really nailed the empty yet messy nature that depression can have. That depression mess. Carey's house is full of all the trappings of the rich and the illustrious, of course, designer furniture, expensive trimmings, but it's not a homey kind of home. There's very little hints of personal elements. Even Johnny comments on how not Carey the whole place feels. And despite the gap of time between the two, how Johnny is still sort of back in the 2020s with his last interaction with Carey versus Carey being in 2077, Johnny's not wrong, as we soon see. The mess of depression in this house hits. I can't say I've seen any other games kind of nail it like Carey's house, because, I don't know, the household mess of depression isn't necessarily like a hoarder. It's not that you have mountains and piles of shit everywhere. A lot of the time, that kind of mess just has the energy of, oh, there's a French fry on the floor, and I just don't have it in me to pick it up. There's a blanket on the table, but I just don't have the energy to care. Which sounds lame, but it's the most pathetic feeling in the world. Also, side note, I found the other half of Big Joe's Burger in Carey's house, and I'm like, how did that get there, Carey? Do you have something to tell us? A lot of Carey's workout equipment is stored away, or just left out haphazardly, probably just gathering dust. Some of his instruments are knocked over, there's graffiti on the wall inside the house, probably by his own hand, or maybe it was by the guy who broke in to steal his guitar, the guitar that you can actually steal back in that one quest for Padre. There's nothing about this house overall, in the end, that really feels personal to him, aside from 2 things. The picture of Carey shedding his samurai skin, and a picture of his ex-wife, Louise. Now, the first picture, or portrait, shows Carey literally shedding the robes of a samurai in a pile on the floor, standing naked and holding a sword. It reminds me of that Geralt portrait you can get in Blood and Wine, but just because the art shows that Carrie has shed the robes, the skin of samurai, as if he's now coming into his own, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true to life. Rather, this piece, I think, speaks of his greatest wish, to let go of his past. Something he hasn't really been able to do. Even Carrie's solo music bears an emblem, not unlike Samurai's. Carrie might wish to manifest this change, to will it to happen to him. I see this art as his way of trying to create that change. If art imitates life, then life imitates art, right? And that's actually a big theme I find of Carrie's story, or at least one of them. Carrie has spent a long time trying to find fulfillment externally, but never quite succeeding. I think that's a common problem we all face at one time or another. It's hard to look inward sometimes. We see how Carrie keeps reviews of his work, positive and negative, reviews of other people's work in the music industry, in his house. And one can only imagine how many times he's read all of these files. It's probably even more painful that most of his new work has not been viewed as positively as his past music. Carrie tries to manifest change also through spirituality and listening to his guru back in the Philippines. But advice is like therapy. It can't just fix you. You have to take those tools from that advice or from that therapy and find a way to use them to enact the change in your life or in yourself that you want. Carrie tends to turn to impulse and destruction to try and enact change. And while I can understand some of it, it feels very listless and I feel very sad for him. It's very ironic that a creative person like Carrie can make a lot of stagnant choices throughout his quests. Stagnant like the waters that he sinks that yacht into. Yes, like Carrie says on the beach, he can be happy in that moment as he watches that ship burn. But what happens after that? Yes, Carrie can feel maybe a bit better about himself, maybe having taken matters into his own hands, but I don't know. I worry about him, especially depending on the choices you make with Us Cracks, which I'm excited to talk about because Us Cracks is fun. Also, when it comes to the picture of Louise, Carrie's ex-wife, we see another layer of Carrie. Carrie is such a deep and almost subtle character. He doesn't really show us, even if you romance him, all of his layers. He doesn't really ever get fully vulnerable with V. He's far more vulnerable with Johnny than he ever, I think, could be with V. Unless V somehow survives longer than 6 months after the ending and Carrie and V get to have a lot of time together. In that case, that's possible, but either way with Carrie, we have to learn a lot of things about him through clues and hints and reading between the lines of things that he says. I love doing that. And I also love what that reveals about him. I feel like the writers really did a great job with the show don't tell aspect of Carrie. Carrie can speak to V and Johnny like his divorce and estrangement from his family has been a positive thing, but this feels very thin. Even to Johnny, I think he's like, Carrie, you're not being entirely truthful here when Carrie's talking like that. Like, Carrie is trying to hold up a nonchalant sort of front, a tough rocker boy image, kinda like Johnny, but Carrie is a lot more outwardly sensitive. I don't think he's nearly as hardened a person as Johnny is, and that's why with Carrie that image doesn't quite suit him. It damages him a lot more apparently than, say, it looks like it does with Johnny. I think Carrie misses his family deeply. I think he views it as his biggest screw-up to have lost that, though he tries to make it seem like he doesn't care. Like his career is all that matters. He tries to make it look more professional, but I actually think that Carrie, considering what Carrie can admit in the Star ending, Carrie is very fearful, he's very anxious, and I think he's scared of the vulnerability that comes with maintaining relationships. And I think deep down he kind of knows that this is a problem he has, and that could be why his family life fell apart. Obviously Louise means something to him. I can't see why else he would still have her photo on his coffee table like that, where he can see her every day. I don't think that's the energy of someone who hates their ex-wife. Of all the truly personal items in his apartment, guitars aside and naked portrait aside, that one of Louise, I think, says the most. And I think Carrie also feels similarly about Johnny. The whole thing of what could have been. I could have been happy if I did X, or had Y, or decided Z. But here Carrie is clearly depressed, in a crisis, despite having everything he once thought would make him happy. The things that ultimately could make him happy are the scariest to take the leap and pursue, and Carrie is a little more scared. I feel so bad for Carrie in this situation because he's an old man who has a lot of regrets, even if he doesn't look like it. Like, just imagine an old man without all that de-aging sitting in a nursing home, 89 years old, thinking how many things he fucked up in his life. Like, that is sad. Carrie at the moment is mired in his regrets, and he doesn't know how to pull himself out of it. When Johnny reveals himself to Carrie through playing that guitar, even if Johnny is wearing a female V's face, Carrie realizes who it is almost immediately. He holds Johnny V at gunpoint and demands he continue playing, demands to hear the last words Johnny ever said to him, and that's all it takes. It's also kind of interesting to note that I'm willing to bet Carrie is also on edge about an intruder in his house because of that guy who broke into his house and stole his guitar. I mean, I imagine anybody would be freaked out if some random stranger broke into your house with high security to start playing your guitar, but that adds another layer to it. And Carrie, after punching Johnny in the face, seems like he's kind of on, let's say, cloud 7. They muse over all the good old days they once had. Those better days that seem so much brighter in memory. Johnny tells the story of how he ended up in V's body, about his death. Carrie dismisses all talk of attempted suicide when Johnny asks, and also his depression, as cooked-up publicity bullshit. He waves it off like it's nothing. But his surroundings show us another story. Anyway, for now, Carrie cooks up a big plan to reunite Samurai for one last gig, a reunion, a reignition of that old fire in Carrie. For fun and for good times is all. But we're faced with the passage of time throughout this quest. Times change, people change. Things can never really be the same. You can't reignite an old fire that's already died, you just light a new one. Nancy is now a media named Bess Isis. Denny has been living her own life as a musician in her own bands. And Johnny is, in my case, a 23-year-old woman masquerading as Carrie's output who people might think is a mega Silverhand fan. And then there's Henry. Oh, Henry. Getting Nancy to back the gig is really simple after V and Johnny get her out of the Totentons. She even plans the whole gig to be at the Red Dirt, where Samurai played their first gig. But Carrie really does a big whoopsie with Henry and Denny. And it says a lot about Carrie. Carrie literally helps break Henry out of rehab. They escape out a window, which sounds pretty funny, until you recognize how messed up that is. Carrie admits that he's had no contact with Henry, he doesn't really seem to know what's been going on with him. One would think, though, that if you found out your old friend was in rehab, after all these years of not knowing what's going on with him, you would be like, ooh, oh my god, what happened? Is he okay? Maybe I should leave him be while he sorts himself out? Anybody who's ever either been to rehab or had to help someone realize they need to go to rehab, which is really hard, knows how hard it is. Like, people don't just go to rehab for fun, there's usually some pretty big issues. And I reckon that Carrie was at least aware of Henry's previous mental health issues, at least following the breakup of Samurai, because Henry was in a sort of work-related accident that led to a brain injury that sent him on a downward spiral. Carrie's actions here not really thinking about the implications of Henry being in rehab and just breaking him out because he just needs him for his own purpose. Feels very selfish, a la Silverhand. Not only that, but Carrie also gave Henry Denny's address without having any knowledge of their relationship at all, and without he himself really having any relationship with Denny. Henry steals a cement truck and fills Denny's pool with enough cement to pour a pad for a decently sized doghouse for my dog, because I love her and she needs all her space for all her toys. And now you have to choose between Henry or Denny for the reunion performance. You can't have both. Denny's not into it. So we can see that this concert isn't necessarily about getting the old band back together just for the sake of old friendships and old times. There's something else at play here, otherwise Carrie would have cared a little more to know more about these people or to have kept in contact with them. Denny also reveals that she only has such a bad relationship with Henry because Henry only bothered with her for as long as he needed her. Denny used to be a good friend who would help him out of his bouts of unemployment and substance abuse. Denny hooked him up with another band, and it was a promising thing for Henry, as he had stopped using drugs at this time. But as soon as he joined up with them, he stopped talking with Denny. He vanished and blew her off. And he only came crawling back after the band that she had set him up with booted him out after partying with him for a month. Denny had enough and she cut all ties with Henry for her own sake. Yeah, you can't help but feel bad for Henry to an extent, seeing him sitting on a curb like a sad sop. He does seem happier to be back with the band than Denny does, if you do choose him. His life doesn't sound like it's been a very fun one, and he hasn't had many wins, I'd wager. This gig probably means a lot to him genuinely. I would argue that to Henry, he's the most excited to have the band back together. Carrie uses this as a surface reason for why he wants to do this reunion, but Henry's the only one I think who genuinely feels like that because he's still willing to play with Denny despite everything. He's totally down even though he's kind of an idiot. It's interesting when you take into account that Denny describes Henry as the kind of person who only really bothers with people when he needs something from them, and Carrie is kind of giving that same energy a bit with most of the old members of Samurai here. It does sort of reflect a little bit back to us to show us the kind of person that Carrie kind of is. He's not super different from Johnny in the sense of him being kind of impulsive and self-centered. But I just hope that Henry goes back to rehab and gets himself together, because, addiction's not fun, and, But damn it, Carrie, you can't just give people's personal information out like that. You can't just break Henry out of rehab. If Henry's saying he had no idea that Denny was in Night City, there's probably a reason why. At the Red Dirt, most of the old Samurai crew reunites, and it plays a great show. It's a really cool segment. But after is when we learn some more information about Carrie. Carrie speaks after this concert like he's got his mojo back, he's gonna create again. And yeah, he ultimately does, as we can see throughout the later quests. But something about it does feel a little off still. Even Johnny admits that the whole time. He kind of sensed that Carrie wanted this concert, not for the more wholesome, getting the band back together reasons, as he sort of states, but to reignite that past fire that he's so desperately been seeking. As we can find with all the notes and shards in his apartment, Carrie's career has felt creatively dry for some time. And there's a lot of pressure on him, both from his management and from his fans, to deliver more music. But it just hasn't been happening, and I get that. It sucks when you're in a creative drought. Johnny gives him his guitar and says what he says about never playing without him. Because Johnny was ultimately sort of trying to play him into getting back to his old self, sort of. Yes, it's manipulative, but Johnny's intentions are quite different from what we're used to. And it's nice to see that baby Johnny is trying to do something nice for Carrie. Carrie also gives V and Johnny his pistol, called the Archangel. He says this was the very pistol he aimed at Johnny, his signature armament, when Johnny and V broke into his home. But he also says,
No, you shouldn't have, really.
The very gun I tried to shoot Johnny with when he broke into my house.
Meaning you tried to shoot me?
Yeah. And earlier... And never mind.
While he never finishes this line of thought, even in later quests, when you combine this melancholy near admission with how he reacts to V and the suicide ending, no, we never get a direct confirmation that Carrie did try to flatline himself, but I think that he did try, despite his initial denial, to take his own life. His bodyguard managed to stop him just in time. There was someone there to sort of recognize the cry for help a bit, but ultimately that didn't really lead to him getting the help he needed. It just stopped him at that time from ending it all. Carrie's a sensitive, lost guy who's been doing what he thinks Johnny would want him to do, I think, In a lot of ways, he's using Johnny as a unit of measurement in his career, either as a unit to emulate or a unit to surpass. But no matter what he's tried, he's never really felt like he's been able to do either. I think that's why Johnny's words still stick in his mind all these years later. He held Johnny in high esteem, and he's compared himself to him for so many decades. I don't think Carrie feels like he could be nearly as successful by being himself. I think he often feels like a fraud, which is very sad. Carrie makes me sad because it's like, I feel like any creative can relate to feeling like, you're not good enough, or you can't be like that, or, not even creative. Anybody can feel like that. It's not fun. Carrie's been stuck in the past for so long, he's been unable to unshackle himself from his regrets and from these images, these characterizations of the people in his memories. And only through V can Carrie start to move on and live in the present and grow. But yeah, I think Carrie has a lot of what would Johnny do type moments throughout his life, and I kind of worry that in the long term, Johnny's interference could actually harm Carrie's journey to self-expression and happiness. It's entirely possible. Only the sequel or any other appearances could tell us that. Hard to say, but one has to note that Johnny does tend to spread destruction like the flu. We see this happen should we choose the rogue ending at Johnny's insistence. Anyway, time to crack on to Us Cracks. The girls who, I think, could give Carrie a new lease on life. Despite Carrie's supposed solving of his creative problem, he now has another, and it's the worst thing any artist can possibly face, no exceptions. Japanese girl bands. I'm kidding, I love Perfume. Carrie just got wind that the world-famous all-the-rage girl group Us Cracks is covering one of his songs, User-Friendly, which is actually about, ironically enough, the commodification of art, and how this song will just be repackaged like any other despite the contents of its lyrics. Very meta. And Carrie is pissed. At first, it's a little odd that he's so hung up on the girl group. He doesn't fully explain himself until after we blow up their equipment van. The whole idea is to stop their concert from happening so they can't perform the song. Sitting at the Caliente in Rancho Coronado, after evading the police, of whom Carrie is no stranger to, at least according to the police scanner when you cause trouble in Japantown. Apparently Carrie has also dabbled in some tax fraud or tax evasion. Carrie admits that he did leave Samurai, or wanted to leave Samurai, for the reasons Johnny accused him of back in the day. For his own money and his own fame. Or at least, that was a part of it. Carrie doesn't really have a whole lot of shame about that, and fair enough, he owns up to it. But what ultimately really stuck with Carrie was Johnny saying that if he went about this route, he'd just be getting himself stuck on a corpo leash. And that is ultimately what happens to Carrie. Carrie looks at Us Cracks and he sees the bubblegum mold of the corpo machine that churns out a new girl group as soon as the last one fades away, just to make all the money they possibly can before that one fades into obscurity too. And Carrie looks at these girls performing his song without his permission and sees that, doesn't that just make him as much of a corpo commodity? It makes Carrie feel like all those feelings of being a fraud, of being not all that good at what he does, at being a big screw-up despite all his success, about all these things that Johnny said 1,000 years ago, somehow ending up correct. Johnny was right after all these years, once again. It's like a shadow he can't shake. The past is still hanging close behind him, and V can try to help Carrie see that he needs to recognize he has literally decades of creative work and effort under his belt, all his own. Despite Carrie being selfish or manipulative and whatnot, one cannot deny that this man has made himself into a success story to all those who are where he once started. At the bottom of Night City. Especially for musicians who, like Carrie and Johnny, spend all their money on their instruments with barely enough eddies to scrape together to split a burger between them. V tries to sort of pry apart Carrie's insecurities here to make him see that, he's moved mountains, all things considered. Carrie departs feeling a little relieved, even if he can't quite fully come to terms with all the things that V can say to him in this discussion. But Carrie contacts V not long after, angry about the Us Cracks concert that they just delayed rather than canceling, where they will still cover his song. Carrie and V make a way into the concert venue, heading backstage, and the confrontation can go two different ways. One way is that Carrie bursts into the Us Cracks dressing room and threatens the girls like a crazy man, and they file a restraining order against him and just perform his song anyway. It's a sad outcome, and all this will do, I think, is just make Carrie more bitter and stuck in his ways in the long term. He's not gonna really see much change in his life. The other solution is to encourage Carrie to shush and listen to the girls. And the girls reveal that they're just as perplexed and upset to hear about Carrie's displeasure as he is with them performing his song. Us Cracks was led to believe by Carrie's manager, Kovacek, that Carrie consented to the cover. Carrie had no idea about this deal, and he's absolutely pissed to find out his manager went behind his back to give the girls that permission using his name. Us Cracks totally stuns Carrie by standing by him and canceling their tour, refusing to perform the song in protest. They too, despite Carrie's original perception of them as not being real musicians, just commodities, feel the pressure and unfairness that the corpo machine places on them and other musicians and artists like them. They, like Carrie, don't want to be just a commodity, a product to be on the shelf and then removed when their time was up. And it's so sweet, and you get to take a selfie with them, and I love this ending. Carrie and Us Cracks make a whole new song, which they debut at the Dark Matter. Pan Am loves the song, she texts you about it later, and Carrie seems happy. Genuinely happy, for the first time in a long time. Sure, like a begrudging uncle, he still says he doesn't love the girls' music taste, but I think he is accepting that they mean business with what they do. They're serious. Even Johnny admits this about them, and that is something that even this 89-year-old rocker boy could admire. Honestly, I do think Us Cracks and the decision you make in regards to them and how their relationship with Carrie develops is what makes a huge difference between growth or stagnancy for Carrie. No, I don't think Carrie's perfect either way, and it's not a matter of the girls will fix Carrie. No, not at all. I also just love that with Carrie, he's very believable because the character V and even Johnny don't serve like a deus ex machina that magically makes him a hugely better, changed person all of a sudden. With their divine influence as the protagonist character, Carrie still has his problems, he still is a flawed person, even with all the potential growth. But the girls of Us Cracks can help him to try new things. Through opening up to them, Carrie can begin to understand that he's not alone in his concerns for his art. He's not the only artist who has these worries and concerns about his creative identity and his creative abilities. Inspiration and creative energy and overall creative camaraderie often comes from the most unexpected of places. They can help him to really want to grow and change and truly shed that old samurai rocker boy skin into someone more reflective of the kind of creative he wants to be. Otherwise, Carrie does sort of become that old, bitter man, angry and enraged at his lack of control, at his inability to let go of the past, lashing out at a world that only cares about what he can produce, not about himself, and not about his artistry. And the other hope, too, when it comes to Us Cracks and Carrie, with these girls being open and honest with him, and even kind of being vulnerable with him, with how much they love his music, might even be the first important steps of Carrie seeing how opening up to others, and being a bit braver with his feelings, as in being more comfortable with friendships again, could inspire him to be more vulnerable, slowly, someday along the way, to let more new and healthy, real people into his life. Not just memories, not just ghosts. It's like that Song of Ice and Fire quote, the lone wolf dies, the pack survives kind of thing. Carrie can't go on alone forever. Nobody can. And speaking of ghosts of the past and A Song of Ice and Fire, or as you might know it, Game of Thrones, I want to talk about what you're all, I'm sure, expecting me to get into. Parasocial relationships. When one thinks of the term parasocial relationships, the first thing to come to mind, to most people, is like a stalker. And yes, unfortunately, that is a very real thing when you're a media-involved person. Thankfully, I've never had that, insofar as I am aware of. Maybe they're very good stalkers and they're just really good at not making themselves known to me. But back in my cosplay days, because I used to do professional cosplay, I knew of a lot of girls that had stalker incidents. And some guys too. Most people are chill, but all it takes is one crazy person, right? We hear about those cases, arguably the most. But there is a lot more about parasocial relationships that is not commonly spoken of. And parasocial relationships are a huge part of fiction. And there's a lot about parasocial relationships that really kind of explain a lot of Cary Eurodyne's issues and where he is when we meet him in 2077. Parasocial relationships, in the modern sense, are non-reciprocal socio-emotional connections with, in this instance, media figures such as celebrities or influencers. The term was first established by Donald Horton and Richard Wohl in 1956, although the overall definition has changed with the modern times and the development of entertainment. But by no means is a parasocial relationship a new phenomenon, not at its core. Parasocial relationships are some of our earliest, most important relationships in our lives. Many anthropologists and psychologists are now noting how essential it is for kids to connect to fictional, yes fictional, characters in children's media, because they can help them learn important lessons. Even historically, nursery rhymes and fables were told to help children learn important lessons by the parasocial relationships children can form from the one-way bond with the main characters of these stories. Think Hansel and Gretel, The Little Mermaid, Red Riding Hood. All of these stories in their original iterations are super messed up, yes, with horrible things happening to the titular characters, but they were told to get it through the very stubborn skulls of kids, things that they need to watch out for in the big bad world. In modern day, most kids' stories are more about building kids up, rather than warning them of cannibals, which, understandable, but it's the same sort of premise. The purpose is still there. Sometimes the best way to teach a lesson to a kid is not to deliberately spell it out to them, but to have them sort of like go through a more empathetic experience through a fictional character. One could even reach back to as far back as uncharted history, when we were nomadic and spent our nights in caves or around the fire, telling stories for entertainment or for lessons and whatnot, conveying stories of ancestors and where they hunted and how they lived in tough times, could both create a link between the dead and the living, the past and present. Even religion is considered a parasocial relationship. God is the ultimate no-face influencer. Throughout history up to present, countless figures in countless religions and mythologies have been held in intimate, close understanding, or even in fear and terror by humans, even without, well, physically meeting them. Unless you have and you're just not telling anyone where they're at. I suppose I've met Satan. He lived in my aunt's barn in the body of a cat. Parasocial relationships are most present, however, right under our everyday noses, in arts and entertainment. Especially in fiction, because they can help someone expand their empathy. The mark of an excellent writer, that I think every writer hopes they can someday accomplish or achieve, is create a character that people feel as if they know them personally, whose experiences they feel they lived with them. Yes, it's a one-way bond to a person who doesn't exist, but that's how you know you've done good. You've made a fake person feel real enough that someone connects to them and maybe even grows as a person because of them. But there are a couple lines where a parasocial relationship can become unhealthy. And we see a couple instances of both these lines being crossed with Cary. Parasocial relationships are not inherently unhealthy. I just want to highlight that. They're a feature of how our extremely social brains work. It's a feature, not a bug. The ability to have parasocial relationships with otherwise fictional characters throughout our existence has been a huge benefit to our survival. It all connects to our storytelling brains. but they were never meant to be substitutes for real human relationships with real people. We need those too. Humans do require, naturally, a bit more interaction than that to maintain their basic mental health, even physical. Without meaningful relationships and bonds with other people, regardless of the amount of relationships that one desires to have, we do eventually show signs of depression. We feel isolated, we lose motivation, we lose energy. That's a very interesting thing about social animals like us. Carrie is, as I said, very lonely. He doesn't really seem to have any real friends. He only really has his housekeeper and I think his chef in his life, but those are employees, they're not his friends. He's only really kept in contact with Nancy from Samurai, but even then it seems like both have been really busy with their lives and their careers, to a point of not really being all that close to each other. Carrie's also lost the family he once had for ultimately unknown reasons, but that he still keeps Louise's picture shows he still does hold her memory very close to his heart. He probably remembers the old Louise, the old him, times that in memory seem so ideal, and it's just like, where did it all go wrong? These characters of his memory, of course, are colored by the emotional paint of his past. They keep him company for better or for worse, because somehow it's less painful to hold on to those than to accept that one needs to let them go. And Johnny, the one person Carrie held on to the longest, I think, out of love or admiration, maybe both, his memories of Johnny. The idea of Johnny, a character, all its own, hovered closely to every corner of his life. His relationship with that memory has been a hugely important one. Carrie, I think, did love Johnny a lot, but I think by now Carrie loves the memory of Johnny, the imagined character that he stirs up in his head of Johnny. We really see how important it is, though, for Carrie to let go of that character of Johnny that he's been nursing in his head during his final quest. Keeping this long dead guy's approval in his mind for all these years must have been exhausting. And there's no doubt that it would have morphed with Carrie's own perception of himself. I kinda wonder if it was a rare thing for Carrie to get approval from Johnny anyway. This is just a theory, but it's entirely possible that Johnny had some envy over Carrie's musical potential, in the same way Carrie admired Johnny's independence and his tendency to just do what he wanted. Carrie's impulsiveness throughout his quests might even be a way for him to take on that side of Johnny, thinking that it is a good thing, but it's actually ultimately self-destructive. The other side of an unhealthy parasocial relationship actually is the reverse. This harms Carrie. And it's the sense of entitlement sometimes that can come about from such a thing towards an entertainer. We've all seen it. Relatively demanding comments that are actually quite mean, hurled at some of our favorite entertainers. It's par for the course when you're a public figure who does things in the public eye. It is what it is, one has to accept it, you can't really change it. But I do think of George R.R. Martin, actually. Like, I love a good I'll Eat Winds of Winter if it's out by this date by Glidus and Alt-Shift-X as much as the next person. Fantastic Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire channels like Quinn the GM, who also talks a lot about John Connington, John Con, who also had an unrequited love towards a man who just wasn't into him. 10 out of 10 would recommend all three of those channels, by the way, for anybody looking to fill that A Song of Ice and Fire void in their heart as they await, hopefully, the Winds of Winter's release, hopefully. On the flip side, like, there's some people out there, it's the internet, this is bound to happen, but there's people who make, like, threats and malicious comments because George R.R. Martin hasn't finished the book yet, and it's like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck? Like, that's crazy. I could never imagine saying some of the things that I've seen people say to anybody in any capacity, even like thinking that, like, oh my god, like, that's bad for your soul too, man. Carrie does apparently have a lot of fans who are growing very restless with him. His record label is pressuring him for results, as that's the machine they've created and maintained all these years. I don't blame the fans who might be flinging rude demands at Carrie. I blame the harmful system that perpetuates the entitlement of battering down an artist emotionally and verbally so that they can produce the cash cow that the corpos and bigwigs and hires up can milk for millions. It's quite disturbing when you break it down. I actually love that social media in our modern day can allow artists and creatives to work directly for themselves without the double crossing of an upper level lording over you that wants their due. That whole thing reminds me of old Hollywood and how the studios would control every aspect of an actor's life and career. Poor Norma Jean, who also went through the same circus. Or as you might know her, Marilyn Monroe. A woman who also had few friends by the end of her life, who also had substance abuse issues, who experienced the loss of her creative energy and motivation, who had a troubled love life, severe depression, terrible anxiety, due in no small part to the pressure of her persona that was ultimately out of her control. The other thing, too, is we see a small microcosm of this type of harmful entitlement and assumption through a one-sided relationship, and how Carrie thinks he knows everything about us cracks 100% and who the girls are, just based on the media persona he's been seeing and interacting with in his head, which then gets blown out of the water when he actually stops to meet the real, actual girls who just wear the us cracks costume. The commodification of entertainers doesn't just damage Carrie's own sense of his art, it hurts him physically, mentally, and I hope that with the us cracks on his side, he can find a way to take back the reins, held by those at his record label, and maybe, not unlike he and Johnny did with their shared club back in the day, start their own musical venture, by artists, for artists. One can only hope. But now that we've covered the parasocial aspect to Carrie Eurodyne, we must talk about what we've all been waiting for, the romance. Only a male V can romance Carrie, even though he's canonically bi. But I do think that female V dodges a bullet, but I don't think Carrie's interest in male V is based on who V is, unfortunately. At least not as much as you would hope. If you're romancing Carrie as male V, he asks right before you kiss him,
"Is he here? Does it matter?"
And yes, Carrie does say it doesn't matter to him whether or not Johnny's there, but I do think it does play a role in his attraction to V. Johnny actually says as much in a dialogue you can have with him at V's apartment, supposing that Carrie views banging V like he's finally banging Johnny. And while this could just be dismissed as yet another controversial statement by Johnny, I do agree with him. And my reason for kind of thinking he's right is based on how Carrie treats V versus Johnny throughout the questline, and the importance of Johnny in most of Carrie's interactions with V. We see multiple times throughout the Carrie quests how Carrie kind of just leaves V hanging as soon as they come to, after Johnny's left the building. He kind of just flies away after V wakes up, obviously not well when V's in Carrie's house. With Johnny, you know Carrie would be way more concerned. Carrie does this again at the Red Dirt after Johnny leaves and then V comes back once again. Not feeling great, but Carrie just kind of screws off. Even after V is technically the one who did most of the running around to get Nancy and all that. Even Johnny notes this. Every other romance partner in the game has some noticeable concern for V, whether it's due to a dangerous situation or because of the relic malfunctioning. Carrie at most kind of shows some concern, but it doesn't feel like he really sees V as more than Johnny's host, and eventually a casual friend. In Carrie's last quest, he brings you along to blow up his manager, Kovacek's, yacht, the Samurai. Carrie tells you of his guru and what he's taught Carrie about cycles, circles of life. The end of one cycle is the start of something new, and the conversation feels hopeful. Carrie's playing music again. He remembers that big samurai hit he wrote on his stint working on that boat, and he feels like a new cycle is starting for him on another boat. It's full circle. He feels that buzz of creativity again, and it's nice to see Carrie looking happy, satisfied with his art again. Here, Carrie admits that if he could rip Johnny out of his head, he would. He really wants to. And I think if you did cooperate with us cracks, Carrie will be able to do this. No, I don't think he does that in the course of his quests with V, but I think the door he's opened because of being encouraged to become friends with these girls will help him to move forward and to build healthier relationships, to change how he sees himself and his music. But if you don't encourage that relationship, if you don't encourage Carrie to grow, I don't know if he will ultimately succeed at letting Johnny in the past go. His talk of cycles is basically, I think, either a true, fresh beginning for him, rising from the ashes of samurai, or the samurai, if we're getting technical, and truly starting the long and difficult process of moving on. Or it's a hint of how cycles just repeat. Carrie may be happy for a time, creating again, until once again he falls into the slump of depression he was in. Lonely, overworked, and lost. The Phantom Liberty ending, though it's the same no matter what choices you make, I believe, with us cracks, you could sort of see maybe, like, Carrie might be doing good in this moment, but I think the choice you make in the us cracks quest could factor into where he goes after he comes down from his touring high. Carrie may be happy for a time, creating again, until once more he falls into the slump of depression that he was in. Lonely, overworked, and lost. And this time there won't be Johnny's ghost to break into his house and save him, so to speak. In that case, Carrie is embracing the self-destruction that comes with impulsivity, plunging deeper into a sense of chaos that brings him closer somehow to the bedazzled memory of a man who he felt he could never exceed. When it comes to Carrie's ensuing romance, I'm just gonna apologize in advance to the Carrie romancers. I like Carrie as a character. I think he's very well written, especially when you consider the short amount of time we really have to get to know him. But he's the only romance option, I think, that doesn't truly, wholly love V. From a writing perspective, I really like how they executed it, but it's sad and unfortunate. I don't think Carrie can love V, not yet. I think he still has a long road ahead of growth and moving on from the past before he can really open up to someone else. He also just tells V that he likes them, not loves them insofar as I could find. At most, I find Carrie's affectionate with V flirty, but he never really seems to show his deeper self all that much. Like, I feel like he would have shown a deeper, more vulnerable side to Johnny. That's the thing. I think Carrie regretted not ever opening up to Johnny maybe in the way he wanted to. Carrie is never as vulnerable with V as the other romance options are. In the star ending, Carrie admits, after a lot of prodding, that he's breaking up with V and choosing to stay in Night City because he's scared of losing V and having to return to Night City alone. Carrie blames Night City for their breakup, which, sure, it's a rough place, but he can't, at this point, take responsibility for what the real issue is, I think, between the two. Carrie is running on fear. It's holding him back from what could bring him true happiness. Which, in turn, makes me think his affection for V, or love, if it did get to the point of being called love, never exceeded his own worries and concerns about himself, his own fears and anxieties. It wouldn't have worked out in the long term, I think, and as much as that breakup sucks in the star ending, I think Carrie is doing the right thing. He's doing V a favor in the long run. Carrie is more willing to focus on his career, on something external like that, something he knows how to do after 70 plus years of doing it, than to focus on building something new and ultimately very valuable with V. That doesn't make him a bad person, not at all, but it just shows that it was not going to work out. I think no matter the ending. I do feel bad for V because I think it is very hurtful to V. I wonder if V is thinking, is it because Johnny's gone? But even River is more vulnerable with V than Carrie is. It's a scary thing, but it's sort of necessary to build a strong relationship, even a friendship. And Carrie just can't do that yet with someone. He has a lot of self-exploration and growth to attend to. And when it comes to Johnny and Carrie's unresolved feelings for him, Carrie, in his mind, can get closer to Johnny than he ever has, even if it's through V, not Johnny, that he can have the intimate relationship with. I don't think Carrie's consciously thinking this, no, not at all, but I think it's a part of the attraction to V. It's the allure of what could have been almost being again, sort of like Rogue and Johnny. There's Johnny on the other side of the windows, probably feeling a little awkward. V as a friend is nice, and I think V can be a very important, encouraging figure in Carrie's life. But V does sort of represent a phantom thread back down the line to Johnny, and the last thread he needs to cut so he can become the person he's been dying to grow into. His own. As for V, God, it sucks that the male romance options in this game are either more unhealthy in Carrie's case, or chopped up like River's than both the female romances. It sucks. It sucks. Do I understand why? Yeah. I mean, most of the people playing this game will likely be guys who want to romance the ladies, but no one's ever complained about a well-written, engaging, believable romance for a less popular character. A good story is a good story. And, like I said, a parasocial relationship with a character who's written well can make people look past the superficial side of it and just be like, that was a good story, I'm glad I tried that plotline. Rivers is almost okay, it's just that it's chopped the fuck up. I love his quests. I want to romance River, but I find it really hard because there's no connection there. It feels like a wasted opportunity. It's not the same, so I almost always romance Judy because it's just this is probably better for my V. Also, all the male romance options break up with you if you leave Night City, whereas Judy and Pan Am, they're with you, and I'm just like, what the hell, guys? It makes me sad. As much as I love a good story depicting realistic, believable, flawed people like Carrie, it would suck for anybody who's playing a male V who wants to romance a man and have their only option be a joy toy or an 89-year-old rich grandpa who doesn't care as much about V as perhaps V might care about him. I get the vibe from male V's voice acting. It just feels like it's very hurtful for V when they find out Carrie is breaking up with them or Carrie has moved on. I feel bad for V. I'm not saying the other relationships in this game are flawlessly healthy in comparison, but it's sad that the only male-on-male romance isn't really emotionally engaging in the same way that Judy and Pan Am's are. Anyway, regardless of the misgiving surrounding his romance in that sense, Carrie is an incredibly well-written character. His story is very much a show-don't-tell one, I find. You have to read between the lines to see how lonely he is and how hurt he is and how complex and layered he is. He's a creative man who bears his soul in his art, but also walks a fine line of pleasing the masses in order to keep up his rep, to keep making money, to fill those hollows of his life with eddies and words of praise. But because those are just things, they clear out so quickly he has to keep going. And it's just an exhausting cycle. Carrie seeks fulfillment externally unless you help him to see that where that fulfillment lies is ultimately within. It always has been, as I feel like his guru probably tried to communicate to him. We see how sensitive Carrie is to criticism and the opinions of others through those files in his apartment. We see the long-term effects of a toxic, likely emotionally abusive friendship with Johnny. We see the pain of someone who, on the surface, seems to have it all, but ultimately has nothing that he really feels holds value anymore. And in the suicide ending, we see a man who understands the depths one has to be at to make that final decision that V does Carrie is angry at V, but in a way that feels different to other characters in that ending, like Pan Am. Carrie is angry because he was in that same position not long before V came into his life and helped him, hopefully, find his footing again, away from that very dark place. Carrie also had his bodyguard there to stop him in the moment, and V to carry him forward from that point. So Carrie is angry because he intimately understands how wasteful and devastating that decision that V makes is, of taking their own life. Carrie is probably thinking about his own decision and feeling all these terrible feelings of like, so this is what is on the other end of when you make a decision like that. This is the pain that the people left behind feel. And he understands both now. There's anger and grief and sadness. And I think Carrie does feel extremely terrible that when it came to V making that decision, there was no bodyguard there to stop V. Carrie wasn't there to stop it, no one was. The difference one person can make is astounding. But perhaps the most sobering, bittersweet ending for Carrie is the Phantom Liberty ending. And while it does suck that Carrie, if you romanced him, has clearly moved on with his life, this does show that Carrie has grown from his past somewhat, even if it's just his past with V in those 2 years. Which is painful, especially if you romanced him, because he doesn't really seem to have a huge emotional reaction, even if you were romancing him. He's really let V go, but he's more than happy to send you eddies. But I mean, eddies are no object to him, so it makes the gesture a touch hollow. Like, on one end, this is Carrie having grown into being more comfortable just being who he is, which, you know, I think is a really good thing for him. But at the same time, Carrie shows us who he is. And you know what they say, when someone shows you who they are, you gotta believe them. And I think Carrie was always this person inside. It just might not have been as clear to a V who romances him before. That is why I think Carrie is a good friend for V to keep at arm's length kind of deal. Carrie is still self-absorbed, yes, and his career is important to him above all. Sorry, V. That doesn't ever really change, I think. But Carrie's story is definitely one of my favorites in terms of just how believable he is. Yes, indeed, they nailed the parasocial aspect of him. In that sense, I think. I love how they depicted him as an artist, as a character you really gotta look deeper at to see all there is about him. Even though Carrie appears at the end of the game, or around that point, Carrie Eurodyne's questline is still quite fun. And while he's definitely, in my opinion, not a great choice for V as a lover, unless you're all in it for the casual sugar daddy air of it, I will always appreciate how well CDPR portrayed his multifaceted struggles as a successful artist, as an astronomically rich guy, and how all that glitters is not, in fact, gold. In the sleepy little town of Laguna Bend, on the outskirts of Night City, there was a little girl named Judy. Judy was bright, spunky, and above all, led by a good heart. But even after the town of Laguna Bend was submerged, locked away from the light of day, this little girl never left it. Judy was alone in the dark hallways of its memories, the sole light left to glow in the shadows. Here, Judy held her vigil until it nearly destroys her. Judy grew up in Laguna Bend, a small town that used to be on the outskirts of Night City. While she still played with the other kids, Judy was still the bottom of the pecking order. The other kids never failed to remind her of her poverty and the fact that she had no parents to speak of. But Judy was unafraid of being herself. Her grandfather inspired her love of technology, which led to her becoming the genius braindance editor that we know her as. Based on entries you can read on her personal terminal, Judy is an expert techie, but she would much rather pursue her talents in an artistic, independent field, rather than sell out to a corporation. Judy has her principles in a place that tends to snuff them out. Judy's distaste for injustice stems from the fact that Laguna Bend, despite the fact that it was still a bustling town with plenty of people living in it, was flooded by corporate interests. Quite literally. Despite protests and people still wanting to live in their homes, the corporation that wanted to build a reservoir that would swallow Laguna Bend began the process of doing so. Things got bad enough that the company was conducting a smear campaign against the residents of Laguna Bend, calling them political dissidents, even though they were just trying to defend their homes. One of the worst incidents during the protests was when a Laguna Bend resident climbed on top of one of the cranes. The crane operator was ordered to continue construction, and in their attempts at trying to remove the protester by force, they lost control of the crane's payload. It crushed one of the homes below, with a family still inside. Even with the good intentions of that person who climbed that crane, filled with passion, grief, and a sense of justice, this was not enough to actually change anything. All it did was lead to the events that killed even more innocents. One less family to protest the corporate interests that were inevitably going to win here. What are good intentions in a city that doesn't even register good versus bad? In Night City, might equals right, and that is what happened with Judy's childhood home. Judy took from this instance the truth of injustice in Night City, and from here on out, resolves to live her life in defiance of the uncaring values that were rampant around her. In Judy's mind, if she can do good, she should. The only problem for her was figuring out the right way to do that good. And this is also where Judy begins to sink deeper and deeper into a reality far too cold for her fiery heart. Judy started her tech work at Clouds, editing brain dances. It was here that she first met Evelyn, Tom, Roxy, and Maiko. Judy's tenure here did not last long, due to the horrible treatment of the dolls that worked there. The Tiger Claws that owned Clouds were only concerned with the money that came in at their establishment. So long as any potential abuse and violence against the dolls that were under their employment generated enough money, the Claws would look the other way. I also can't help but wonder just how many horrible things Judy would have seen in editing brain dances at Clouds. I'm assuming she would have unfortunately had to witness some of the worst clients through the doll's memories. Judy was just a techie, and although she knew the doll chips very well, she still wouldn't have been able to enact any real change at Clouds. This helplessness would have been heartbreaking for her, knowing what was going on behind the scenes here. That is, until she fell for Maiko. Maiko was just a doll when her and Judy started dating, but it wasn't long before Judy, who was a hopeless romantic to a fault, tweaked Maiko's doll chip to help her rise in the ranks. The idea was that if Maiko got promoted, Maiko could start to make some of these changes that Judy really wanted to see at Clouds. Changes that could make life better for the dolls that worked there. Or at the very least, that is how Maiko appealed to Judy. Part of me feels like because Judy wears her heart on her sleeve, she can be a beacon for people who want comfort, but also kind of attracting certain people who might view her as easy to manipulate, especially with her very valuable skills as a techie. Sometimes people with a goal to get something from someone else can come off as confident and in control. To someone who feels hopeless and floating with no real sense of direction, I believe that Judy was so eager to help Maiko shoot right up the ranks because Maiko presented her promotion in a way that gave Judy a sense of just direction. As much as Judy wants to make genuine change in Clouds, she is not the best with people, or at deciding what direction is best. I think the hard nature of the place she lives is very overwhelming for her. Any love and affection that Maiko could show Judy was likely a huge relief to her after a long day of dealing with the gross environment she worked in. But of course, the irony of this love and affection is that Maiko, even if she may have felt genuinely for Judy, was still using it to manipulate her, sort of perverting that one precious thing that Judy thought she had in Night City. Maiko appealed to Judy in the sense that she was giving Judy the illusion of making the change she so craved, and doing it with someone that she cared about and thought shared her values to an extent. As time went on, even after Maiko was promoted, her promised changes were few and far between. For a while, Maiko could blame the higher-ups at Clouds, she could blame the Tiger Claw bosses, and say that she was getting to it. Meanwhile, Judy decided to leave Clouds to join the Mox, a gang run by Joy Toys for Joy Toys. While Judy still kept things on with Maiko, she would rather use her talents to help people, where all the money from these brain dances that she was tuning would at least go back to the performers, and to the members of the gang that worked the streets. But Judy soon began to realize Maiko's true intentions. As someone who only sought power for herself, Maiko did not share Judy's immense sense of right and wrong, and from all the dolls Judy still kept in touch with, she realized that nothing at Clouds was changing and nothing was going to change. The only real change was Maiko, who was getting far more money and luxury from the work that the other dolls were now doing. This realization shattered Judy, but the pain of realizing Maiko's manipulation of her and the loss of their breakup was a lot for Judy. Adding on to this is when some friction developed between Judy and Susie Q, the Mox leader. On one hand, Judy wanted the Mox to help every Joy Toy that needed it. She would invite countless unaffiliated to seek protection and assistance from the gang. Despite the passion of the Mox's members, the Mox really don't have much to throw around in the way of resources, and Susie Q knows this. Susie and Judy began to butt heads over their goals. To Judy, Susie's reluctance to help every Joy Toy that needed it was unfair and unjust. But for Susie, the cold reality is that the Mox do not have the resources to realistically do this. The Mox are just managing to support themselves. This was yet another moment of Judy's own black and white view on the world being shaken. Judy had been manipulated. She'd been used and let down by her own ideas of promise and change. For Judy, what good was any of the things that she had done for other people? Any flicker of hope was always extinguished for her in her quest to create change. So, when Evelyn Parker came back into the picture, begging for help, Judy couldn't resist. Evelyn had ghosted Judy for at least a time. I think this is because of Evelyn's involvement with Yorinobu Arasaka, living a much more comfortable existence for as long as she was his companion. Whether that's true or not, Evelyn was certainly out of the loop when it came to Judy. Evelyn asked Judy to help her with the brain dance that she was going to take of Konpeki Plaza, making Judy absolutely essential for the heist that Evelyn was planning. Evelyn didn't let Judy in on all the details right away, and despite Judy's own suspicions, Judy was more than willing to help her friend, even without these details. Some could even deduce that perhaps Judy held more than friendly feelings for Evelyn. It's hard to say. The developers have said in the past that they intended to leave Judy and Evelyn's relationship ambiguous. Personally, I do think that Judy grew to love her over the course of their reconnecting. Perhaps it was a way for Judy to try to fill that void that was left after her breakup with Maiko, But I also think that Evelyn, not unlike Maiko, was willing to use this to her advantage in getting Judy to help out another doll with another grand plan. But by time V comes into the picture of the heist, Judy is already at the end of her rope. Judy warns V and Evelyn about the danger that they're both in. Judy didn't even know that this heist was even related to Konpeki Plaza until she was looking at the brain dance through V's eyes, which is kind of crazy that Evelyn didn't really tell her that. As much of an idealist as Judy is, she is not crazy enough to think that she can pull the wool over Arasaka's eyes and not expect any consequences. Evelyn had promised Judy that this heist could give her a life of peace, where she could pursue a life of art, a passion of Judy's, to her heart's content. During the Laguna Bend flashbacks that we see in the quest Pyramid Song, Judy says that she used to think that people who played with dolls were losers. In a way, as an adult, this has kind of come full circle. Playing with dolls had led Judy to heartbreak, and now it would absolutely lead her to heartbreaking loss. After the heist ended in catastrophe, Judy and Evelyn had a falling out. Yet despite this, after not hearing from her after Ev left for Clouds, Judy becomes incredibly worried about her. Once V discovers the truth of what happened to Evelyn, V and Judy go on a wild goose chase through Night City trying to find Evelyn, and they are eventually successful. However, they are too late to save Evelyn from the horrors that she has endured. Judy was incredibly brave and devoted to finding Evelyn during this mission. I think it's safe to say that Judy is not the most combat experienced person in Night City, so the fact that she was willing to dive into the scav hideout to find her with no hesitation says a lot about her character. And Judy is, despite the circumstances of their parting, devoted to caring for Evelyn after all is said and done. Judy even scrolls Evelyn's memories to try and piece together the whole story. Judy also sees that Evelyn was still thinking of her and the words that they shared when they last parted. Despite everything, Evelyn was still thinking of Judy and how much she regretted their last words. Judy cares for Evelyn right up until she takes her own life, and Judy is devastated by it. Regardless of the potential nature of her feelings, in Evelyn's death, Judy saw yet another innocent, brutally tortured by Night City. The child still stuck in Laguna Bend sees yet another ruin sunk to the bottom of this lake. With V's help, Judy organizes her own grand plan. Fueled by anger and grief, Judy tries to paint this plan as a good thing, as a plan that can make some real change in Night City. The change that she wished the Mox could bring. But in reality, what Judy wants is revenge disguised as justice. Judy wants to overthrow the Tiger Claws that are in charge of Clouds and turn it into a doll-run establishment. So Judy goes to Maiko, proposing her plan to her ex. In Judy's mind, together they can finally make those changes that Maiko had once promised her she would make. Maiko is cold enough to know that this plan is doomed. It will not turn out the way Judy wants it to, no matter what. Even if a softness for Judy still exists in Maiko, and if you look at her terminal actually, you can see that it does, as she still has a picture of Judy and has been struggling to move on from her. It's not enough to blind Maiko to the fact that the dolls could never hold Clouds. I also kind of think that Judy does go back to Maiko in a way kind of seeking comfort, whether she realizes it or not. I think a part of her would love it if Maiko had just magically started seeing the world through Judy's bright eyes, but that's not how it goes, and the two part on angry terms once again. Judy still dealing with the pain and suffering of her grief. But Maiko does appear to change her mind. And not long after, Judy gets Tom and Roxy in on her idea of a hostile takeover. As Judy tries to present this plan, even Johnny is annoyed by it. Even he can see just how this will all end. With V's help, Judy and the dolls manage to grip Clouds in a chokehold. They brutally take out Woodman, the Cloud's manager, who had assaulted Evelyn while she was comatose. Even after this, Judy is shaken. Not out of regret for getting rid of Woodman, not at all, but because Judy is just beginning to realize the fact that no amount of revenge will fill the void that all of this tragedy has punched inside of her. Everything else goes according to plan after this, at least until Maiko shows her hand. Maiko basically uses this as an opportunity to coerce the other Tiger Claw bosses to let her run Clouds for them. There's only really two endings to this plan of Judy's. One being that if V does kill the Tiger Claw bosses, they will inevitably come back in full force and wipe out a lot of the dolls at Clouds and take it back. The other ending is that Maiko does continue to run it, now officially, and absolutely nothing changes. Following Judy's specific plan is arguably the worst ending. Letting Maiko take over for the Claws is the most sobering end of this quest for Judy, and the one that avoids the most bloodshed. Not only was her plan for revenge used and manipulated by someone she had once loved, again, Judy fell for the great deception of Night City that Evelyn had fallen for.
That he can gain and retain control of anything.
In a heartless city where there are no rules, no standards or rights or wrongs, Judy's own idea that good will triumph over evil is false. Judy's own rage and grief was not sated either. If you take Maiko's bribe to walk away quietly, Judy leaves you for good and never speaks to you again. She still has her principles despite everything, but Judy is left angry and confused and alone. But should you remain true to Judy, rejecting the blood money that Maiko offers to V, Judy simply says that she needs time to herself and walks away. All her life, Judy has lived in a world of black and white. She has refused to see it any other way. But as she leaves V behind, the neon Night City looks a bit grayer than usual. The quest Pyramid Song is a headstone for the Judy that we used to know. While Judy poses this as a fun braindance experiment, a prototype even for a really cool product that she's been working on for a while. I think this is Judy's way of reconciling with her past and the beliefs that have led her to so much pain. Here we revisit her memories of a simpler time. Just like anything else in this place, people forget about the horrors that happen just to keep existing and sort of remaining sane. Ignoring the injustices around them is how anybody manages to stay standing in a place like Night City. But Judy refuses to forget. And after she and V make their dive, I think Judy makes her choice to hold the memories of those that she cared about even closer to her heart. Memories of her childhood, of Laguna Bend, and even Evelyn. But she also knows she has to let them go to truly be free. Judy can't stay submerged in their pain for the rest of her life. Pyramid Song is actually a song by Radiohead, and it was written by Tom York after he went to an exhibition at a museum that involved tomb art and death ritual artifacts, that kind of stuff. One of the lyrics speaks of black-eyed angels swimming with the person the song's perspective is from, implied to be beings that ended their own life. I think that this whole quest is Judy revisiting all of those ghosts that she has been swimming with after all these years. Evelyn, potentially Maiko, all the way back to that family that was crushed in their house in the days Laguna Bend could still see the sun. Ghosts who, in life, were snuffed out and simply forgotten. As harsh as it is, there is nobody left who cares about what happened in Laguna Bend. Nobody cares what happens to some Joy Toy past her expiry date, and nobody cares if your intentions are good. Judy's attempts to force change in this world fail because her focus on what should be clouds her vision over what actually is. Night City is a cruel, unfeeling place, run by cruel and unfeeling values. Kill or be killed, better them than you, and so on. Just as that person who climbed that crane realized only too late that their well-intended actions were ultimately fruitless against the overwhelming powers that be, so did Judy in that failure at Clouds. Failure to save Evelyn. Failure to make Maiko see the light. And until this mission, a failure to let go. So many failures that Judy blames herself for in a world that is unfair and impossible to fight in the first place. For all of these people, Judy has been carrying the pain of their loss and the nature of their loss. And I think she comes back here to finally emerge from these dark waters as someone who is willing to move on and to continue living, to keep hope, but to not sacrifice herself to do so. Judy knows that she can't really leave Night City until she lets go of the mad cycle it was washing her through. And finally, at long last, with V by her side, Judy finally does this. She finally lets go. I also don't think it's a coincidence that this funeral-esque quest takes place in part in a church, where Judy can say that proper final goodbye to those ghosts that she knows all too well. And to top it all off, I think it's really sweet that they decided to allow Judy to be able to save somebody she cares about at long last, by saving V when the relic malfunctions, and otherwise V would have drowned. So it's nice to see that this rebirth of Judy actually manages to accomplish what she had tried and failed so many times to do for the people she cared most about. Only in letting go for her own sake is Judy able to finally pull somebody else up from the abyss. I want to end this with my own thoughts on Judy's romance, and why I think that while it is absolutely the best romance in the game, and I almost feel like it's the canon romance in the game, I think it's still the worst option for Judy. I think that Judy should absolutely leave Night City. For her to leave, and while it could be viewed as a bleak symbol, like her finally emerging from Laguna Bend once and for all, I think it is also one of hope, of rebirth. And even if Judy has a very fiery personality, there is water symbolism packed into every part of her character and her questline. It is in her tattoos, it is in her backstory, it's her fish tank at her apartment, it is the general theme of her art, her quest called Pisces. Somebody even said, if you know things about horoscopes, she is a stereotypical Pisces, which I thought was very funny. And I think attaching the meanings of rebirth and carving a new path and renewal and that kind of thing is a really nice sort of tie-in to what I personally think is the fate that Judy deserves, being able to move on like a river. Very nice, right? Not river, not that river. Water is a classic symbol of new beginnings, and I think that for her to finally leave Night City shows that while your past will always be a part of you and it will always shape you, that doesn't mean that you can't detach yourself from a horrible situation. You don't have to sacrifice your opportunities of living a better life. There is always hope to do good for the world while also taking care of you. I like the fact that Judy leaves Night City still a moral person, and a free one at that. She understands now that she cannot change everything wrong with this world, but she can make a difference in the lives of those she cares about. She can build a life for herself and pursue what she loves, and still make a positive effect on the world. Bearing the weight of other people's happiness is just not gonna work. At the end of the day, you gotta put your own oxygen mask on to help other people put their oxygen masks on. You know, the old airplane statement. And I think that's what Judy learned. And I also want to say that I still don't feel that even when you leave Night City with the Aldecaldos and you get Judy to come with you, that still doesn't feel like a very fulfilling ending, at least in my opinion. Like, if you're talking best ending for V, I think that is absolutely the best ending for V. But I feel like that is almost like Judy letting V kind of choose the direction her life should take. Whereas I think for Judy, what she needs to do is to finally just choose a direction for herself, and if that is to leave Night City and go exploring and eventually settle down with Bianca, that's great. I think that is the ending that she needs, even if it's not the best for V. And I think V is far too chaotic and deep into the Night City life to offer her what she deserves. I think that the Phantom Liberty ending is the best possible ending for Judy. In this ending, she leaves Night City for good, and she is happy. She lives in peace with a woman who loves her wholly. And as much as Judy may have wanted all those things that she cared about to matter to the rest of the world, things are not always so black and white. And that she is not the one who has to bear the weight of the world on her shoulders. River Ward is one of the more polarizing characters of Cyberpunk 2077. His story feels rushed, which is a shame considering how his questline is actually kinda unique. His romance comes out of left field, however, and the level of trust he develops with V feels really sudden and not at all organic. Almost like there was, once upon a time, supposed to be more. And if you've ever had that same sort of hunch, you may very well have been onto something. Welcome to Shaped by Stories, where sometimes we take a trip into the fictional morgue and dissect the stories lost on the cutting room floor. Put your gloves on, guys. This fiction forensics is a messy one. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's first go over the character we know as River from the final game. River was a detective with the NCPD, motivated to join the force by the murder of his parents, witnessed when he was just a kid. He has a strong sense of justice, a rare thing in Night City, and this is what drove him to be the determined cop he is. The police never found the thugs that killed his parents, and River swore that he would do everything he could to save other families from that same injustice. He would not stand for the NCPD's usual incompetence. He would stand against it. Despite all the obstacles River was up against, he stayed true to this promise. But, of course, time on the force made him see that it wasn't so simple as basic incompetence. The Night City Police Department is corrupt and, overall, underfunded. A lot of the officers chafe against the corporate red tape put up by those that pay off their superiors to look the other way. Many join the force to do good, but are inevitably prevented from doing so. River stayed on the force for a number of years, dealing with the suicide of his partner and the repeated thwarting of his investigations by the NCPD brass. He did his best to juggle caring for his sister and her children, standing in as a father figure a lot of the time, but was determined to catch as many criminals as he could. His work began to consume him, so much that it led to a brief estrangement between him and his sister, Joss. Of course, River was thinking of justice night and day, the justice that he never got, that his family never received. In a world so twisted and wrong, a fact he would come face to face with each and every day, why wouldn't he want to just see one thing go right? River ended up getting a tip that Night City's mayor, Lucius Rhine, was in danger. River managed to save the mayor's life from this would-be killer. But later that night, Rhine ended up dead anyway, from what the police called a heart issue. But River was, of course, suspicious, especially after he was told to drop it by his superiors. But he kept pressing. He and V meet through Jefferson Peralez, who River did some work for. And yes, I will be talking about Peralez in this video as well. V and River uncover that Rhine was actually killed by a spiked BD. River tries to get the case reopened, only to be suspended from the force. He and V then go on this detective goose chase that is actually a very well done quest. You have to rescue River's nephew Randy from a really messed up serial killer kidnapper. So long as the rescue mission goes off without a hitch, you get invited to a family cookout with River and his family. And it's actually a really sweet quest. I really enjoyed it. But if you're playing female V, it quickly becomes really awkward. So now that we've gone over the plot, I just want to outline why I don't think River's plot and romance work well. Because on its own, I really enjoyed River's quests. They were quite interesting and fun, a very different change of pace from the usual cyberpunk vibe. You're helping out this rogue detective. You're solving a mystery. River actually seems like a well-intentioned yet layered, severely traumatized guy, and his voice actor does an amazing job. As a character, I found him really interesting, and I genuinely wanted to know more about him. But then, before any more build-up, you get slammed with this awkward romance that doesn't really feel deserved. You go from being a stranger in the first mission to "you're the only person I can trust, let's save my nephew from the milkman," to "let's bang. And if we don't, I'm gonna be kinda salty about it." At least that's the vibe that I've always gotten from River when I reject him on that tower. It just feels so weird. Like there's no real romantic buildup, and there's not nearly enough friendship buildup. It just kind of feels shoehorned in at the last second, just so female Vs can have a male romance. This rushed romance and forced chemistry almost kind of damages River's overall story, at least for me. It feels like we're missing a lot. And wouldn't you know it, the internet thinks so too. And there are some very, very compelling theories about just what the hell happened to River in the writer's room. And you'd never guess that those theories surround Goro Takamura. Cyberpunk 2077's cut content is a, so far, never-ending story. During the game's development, a lot of plot lines were rewritten, and there were entirely new additions to its story late in development. But River is a unique outlier in this situation, where the opposite is kind of what happened. First, let's take a peek at River's concept art. You can see that the original River was a much older gentleman, not unlike Takamura. He even has more cyberware in these original designs that kind of resemble Goro's. While they're ultimately very different in their final looks, when you compare them side by side, you can still see some little details, like the beanie, that might call back to River as the root character. Even I'll admit this is the weakest point of evidence, and that's why I placed it first. However, what I find most fun about this point of the concept art is that in the Phantom Liberty credits scene where you get a call from Takamura, he's decked out, even down to his hairstyle, in one of River's concepts. You could argue that this is just recycling a look because they needed to show just how time in Night City had changed Takamura. But it's interesting that they'd choose a River one specifically. But I also want to note some of the more professional-ish designs here, specifically with the blazers and whatnot, because they do tie in nicely with another account of what River's story once was, and it had to do with an investigation into Arasaka, back when River was once known by the name Sobchak. I apologize for my probably poor pronunciation of that name ahead of time. You're going to be hearing it a few times. I'm going to do my best. Hidden in the game files, a Reddit user named Lara the Dev found that River was often referred to by the names of Sobchuk and Sobchek in scene titles to do with his quests in the final game. But it's not just Lara that made this discovery. There's countless other people who found Sobchek in scene data to do with River and Takamura. The most interesting use we see of this name is in the title of the scene where Takamura kills Dex and rescues V, titled Visions and Sobchuk. Many believe, just based on what's still buried in the bones of Cyberpunk 2077's code, that River, back when he was called Sobchek, was actually supposed to find V at the dump, not Takamura. At this point, Takamura didn't even exist yet. Hello, Liddy from Post here. Sorry about the audio sounding a bit different, but I had to put this in. When I was looking for all the posts mentioning Sobchek or River's original name on Reddit, I came across this particular post, which led me to this concept art by Cyberpunk artist Luke Poehler, who worked on the game. And so this picture that I'm showing you is an illustration for an inside presentation of Cyberpunk 2077's story posted by Luke. And you can see here that River's original design with his bandana, beanie, and his jacket, finding V in the dump. This is really interesting because considering it must be really early concept art, we can see that at some point or other this version of River was supposed to save us. Anyway, back to video. Considering how close to the dump that River's family's trailer park is, it does kind of feel like a natural next stop. Aside from, well, a Ripper doc. Maybe River was investigating Dexter Deshawn about what happened in Pacifica. Maybe he would have shot Dex, or maybe Dex already would have been dead. This would have tied River into the main questline, something lacking in the final game. River is, in fact, the only romance not connected to the main questline in any way. Even Carrie technically is, considering Johnny. From there on out, River would have been involved in an investigation into Arasaka, at least based on the trail left by the ghost of this Sobchek character. Maybe he would have helped you to hunt down Dexter Deshawn, to get some revenge, maybe answers. River might have been the one to help you get info on Evelyn and Hellman, instead of V's goose chase in the final game. Judy, apparently at this time in development, did not have nearly as much content as she does in the final game. It would make sense that River's later decrease in plot relevance would open up the space she ended up getting. In the final game, Judy is the romance with the most quests involving her. River is at the bottom with only 3 quests. Panam is actually the next lowest, in fact, at 6 quests. River still would have been a cop in this original story, and he would have been investigating Arasaka. What this investigation would have covered is hard to tell. Apparently, River was still involved in the Peralez quests in these earlier drafts, as other people who've used the Wolven kit have found quite a lot of cut Peralez content as well. But the Peralez quests were not supposed to be how you met River. I actually think that instead of you meeting River through Jefferson and Elizabeth, it would have been the other way around. In the final game, it's Judy who recommends V to Elizabeth Peralez. Insofar as I know, you can only find that reference in an easily missable dialogue with Judy, as well as an email exchange between her and Elizabeth. If Judy really did get a lot of extra content after River's deductions, it only makes sense that they'd use her to tie up some otherwise loose ends left by this mysterious Sobchek. Maybe River was more tied into the main questline originally, perhaps by connecting you with the Mr. Blue Eyes plot. Maybe this would have tied into the cancelled Crystal Palace DLC that they're hopefully going to be recycling in Project Orion. Maybe there was a whole other ending planned to do with AIs, if the Mr. Blue Eyes theories are to be believed. It just feels odd to me how the Peralez quests bleed into Rivers and then both of them die off relatively quickly in the grand scheme of things. They seem so ominous and foreboding, it just feels like there was once so much more. Why did they take away all this character development? This natural buildup of a romance that feels very pushy and awkward in the final game? Why did they take away the organic steps that would have led to a believable friendship between V and River? In regards to River's mystery Arasaka plotline, it was simply decided that River didn't feel like the right fit. His plotline was intended to provide the tie into Arasaka that Takamura ultimately does, though through a sort of vigilante detective lens. And so, late in development, Takamura was born. This is actually a fact that has been confirmed by the devs, that Takamura was a last-minute addition to Cyberpunk's final story. He is ultimately a way more interesting character than River because he got the bulk of River's quests. There's a reason why people wish Takamura was romanceable. It's because he got all the character development that was robbed from River. According to Reddit user Benzen Zimmern, who is actually a dev at CDPR who worked on Cyberpunk, Takamura was considered a potential romance option, but they ultimately decided against it because they simply didn't have enough time to give Goro a good romance. And that makes total sense. You gotta choose the main questline part over the romance part. And while I'm glad that they did decide to focus on that, it does suck that they kinda half-assed River as a result. The Perales quests were chopped with a few key rewrites to introduce River. I do totally understand why they ended up doing what they did with this part of the story. Time was running out and there was only so much they could do. Rather than cut all this content that was a lot of fun quests, they left in what they could salvage. It's just a shame that we're left with some of the most unfinished feeling quests in the entire game. Even if all of what I've said above is just hearsay with the theories about River, that doesn't change what a lot of people feel, that we've lost something in River's story without fully knowing what it is. We're left with a character that I think gets a lot of hate due to unfortunate editing mistaken for poor characterization. But there's one more key aspect to River's role that was supposedly removed from the final game. And it is, in my opinion, the biggest loss of River's cut content. River being a foil for Johnny Silverhand. According to more dedicated data miners, River's character wasn't all that different from the River we got, in the sense that he was dedicated to justice. River still worked with the police, as he does in the final game, despite knowing they were corrupt, because he wants to use their resources to actually make a difference. I will say, it's nice to see those moments where River is a nice, caring guy, he just wants to do the right thing, he despises injustice. Sometimes when I listen to Takamura's discussion of morals and the importance of why one gets their hands dirty, compared to River's drive to bring justice to Night City in spite of the NCPD, you can see almost a fork in the road between these two. There's a lot of parallels between their personal philosophies, and while that could just be two realistically written characters in that sense, people do have common opinions. It could also lead back to a shared root in the writer's room. In the original plotline, River would have apparently clashed with Johnny. Whereas Johnny would have despised River's ties to a corrupt system, River would have hated Johnny's violent radicalism. While we do see some ideological jousting, sort of, between Takamura and Johnny in the final game, and Johnny being mad if you sleep with River because he's a cop, you can't help but wonder, if this is the truth, what we missed out on here. Some data miners say that they found some old quest paths that implied you would have to choose between River and Johnny in the end. And it's all such a shame, because in realizing that River isn't so much a victim of bad writing as he is the cutting room floor, leaves me not feeling annoyed at River. It leaves me going, we were robbed of a healthy male romance for female V? Regardless of whether or not the theory presented above is fact or fiction or a bit of both, one thing's for sure, some plotline surgery went wrong somewhere down the line. And the whole point of videos like this is to point out it's not just the writing of the bulk of the story that's important. Editing and revision are just as important for a seamless experience in a creative project. We could have had a long series of quests that led up to River's romance. We could have had time to get to know this guy, to better understand his unique backstory, and appreciate what he was trying to do in an otherwise helpless place. River and Judy both feel like a pair of romance options for a V who likes the tragic paragon of justice, whereas Carrie and Pan Am are more chaotic. Despite River's short story, a number of people still like him, and I get why. Because when you do break down elements of River's story and pretend the more awkward bits actually have proper pacing and build-up, it's unique. I think it would have been a lot of fun if we just had more time with him. But you only, in the end, kinda know River, and suddenly he's like, I love you. What happened to the broody, good-hearted cop we were supposed to know? I honestly get semi-Garrus Vicarian vibes from this guy, but it will never fully come to fruition, and it makes me sad. As good a game as Cyberpunk is, it's a shame to see a character who once had a lot of potential be left as dismembered as River on that cutting room floor. Strength is a funny thing. Classically, it almost always has positive connotations. It's been a trait of heroes and saviors for as long as humanity has gathered around the campfire. But the flip side of strength can also be seen as stubbornness. A strong will can be rather annoying to some. Bravery can be seen as recklessness, and restraint can be seen as naivete. Strength can even lead you down a destructive path and blind you to other alternatives. The ALLLLLs are a nomad band of strength on loud display. From the rumble of their engines to the shouting matches straight out of a family gathering, these nomads are not afraid to argue what they believe is right, as well as to put their money where their mouth is. But there is one among them who, despite displaying the greatest strength of will of all, is torn by her own doubts. It's a struggle for her to rein it in, to temper her steel and wrestle her fears, to ultimately open her heart in order to fully hone her resolve. A resolve that, for a clan on the edge, is the only thing that can pull them back from the brink. Founded by Juan ALLLLL in the 1990s, the ALLLLLs are considered the first true nomad family. Their formation began as a response to the lack of safety and freedom in Los Angeles in the cyberpunk version of the 1990s. The lower classes there were sick and tired of struggling to survive. They lived in despair, surrounded by rampant crime, with no protection from the authorities. Not all that different from today in many, many places, and certainly not that different from Night City by 2077. The ALLLLls began as some of the most disadvantaged people in society, but by time 2077 has rolled around, the ALLLLs are one of the largest nomad clans in the country. They're relatively peaceful and mind their own business. They just want to be able to survive in a way that keeps them free of corporate control, safe from the parasitic existence of most cities. The ALLLLs roam the Badlands, never staying in one place for too long. And it's not like they're welcome to either. Many people, especially in the NUSA, hold negative views of nomads. We see this in V's Nomad intro, with the sheriff being a douche. An important thing to note about nomads is just how deep their hatred for corporations goes. While not every nomad is born into a clan, many are descended from farmers whose land was bought up or stolen by corporate interests. Many nomads as well are of Native American descent, and this includes Pan Am. Native Americans have an extremely long history dealing with the brunt of corporate and government oppression. This fact could very well have been an influence on Pan Am's staunch opposition to any form of corporate control. But this is just speculation, as we don't really hear a whole lot about Pan Am's background in the game anyway. But there's no denying the influence of this fact and experience on nomad culture. The ALLLLLs also have a long-standing rivalry with the Raf and Shiv, wraiths they unfortunately share the Badlands with. But unlike the Raffen, the ALLLLLs are not murderers. Many among them may not have any love for city dwellers, but they're people who would rather help a dying stranger in the desert as opposed to shooting them. Or torturing them. The Raffen are just generally horrible. Either way, the ALLLLLs don't look kindly on those who would try to stomp out their life of freedom. They don't look kindly on the idea of serving those entities that made their lives a living hell in the first place. So you can imagine just how well things go when somebody tries to do just that. Pan Am Palmer was an ALLLL from childhood. We don't know anything about her parents or if she was born into the clan, but she was pretty much raised by many of the members. Like all kids of the ALLLLs, Pan Am was able to grow up in relative safety, experiencing a freedom that most kids in Night City could never imagine. This no doubt has lent to the development of her extremely independent spirit. The open roads and sands of the Badlands were Pan Am's first friend, though of course she had other friends too. One notable incident from her childhood actually involved her best friend at the time being kidnapped by Raffen, only to be rescued just in time by fellow ALLLL Cassidy Ryder. After this point, Pan Am looked up to Cassidy, whose more cut-and-dried methods of doing the right thing, no pun intended, rubbed off on her. But Pan Am also looked up to fellow ALLLL Saul Bright, the leader of Pan Am's family by 2077. Pan Am grew up hearing all the stories of Saul's adventures and all his exploits in his youth, and she wanted to grow up to be like him. In Saul, Pan Am saw a brighter future for her people. Again, no pun intended. Pan Am grew into a decisive young nomad, one who began to butt heads with the man she had once idolized. Saul Bright has some unconventionally conventional ideas about the direction the ALLLLs should go. Saul is a more politically minded leader who tried to look at things far in the future. Despite his more muscly appearance, Saul played political games, and in a way, this did help his family survive leading up to 2077. The clan was struggling by the time he took the leadership reins, and he knew he had to come up with a plan to save his family. But Saul had a different, more cautious mindset than many other members of his clan. A large number of the ALLLLs consist of veterans of the corporate wars, experiencing the worst the corporations had to offer. They saw villages burned, cities blazing, all in the name of profit and consumption. For those returning after the war, or just joining up with the ALLLLs, they wanted as far away from corporate influence as possible. But Saul was not a veteran. He didn't see the horrors that his fellow ALLLLs saw. This led to a lot of decisions that ruffled the feathers of his closest friends. Though to Saul, any sacrifice was worth it so long as it kept his family afloat. Life as a nomad isn't easy, but it's a life spent among family, living independently of corporate rule. A thing that Saul was very near to violating in order to save his family. Before the events of 2077, Saul moved his clan right outside Night City, and Pan Am followed him. She actually says to V in the star ending that the last time she crossed that border, she did so with hope. She wanted to believe in Saul, even if other people might not have wanted to go to Night City, for understandable reasons. Saul sought a long-term relationship with Biotechnica in order to ensure more consistent pay for his family. Saul actually wanted to get technology that would enable his clan to farm in the Badlands, allowing them some long-term independence. The terms of this arrangement, however, became increasingly constricting and very unfair, and the ALLLLLs were feeling it. But Saul was not interested in hearing opposing viewpoints. His eyes were on the future that he really wanted his clan to have. If they gave a bit of their freedom now, they would have more independence in the future. Or at least that's the thought process. Saul would actually go so far as to punish members who suggested alternate routes of survival. After he returned from the corporate war of 2070, Scorpion made a suggestion that the ALLLLLs maybe sign on with Snake Nation, saying that there was strength in numbers. Whatever Saul's reasons are for disliking Snake Nation, he did not appreciate this suggestion from Scorpion. Saul didn't give him any work for a whole year, more or less ostracizing him from what made their way of life work. Many felt that this ongoing arrangement and bending over backwards for Biotechnica and Saul's near despotic approach was bringing them closer and closer to the corporate slavery that the ALLLLLs wanted to avoid. Pan Am Palmer was the loudest of all the dissenters. While Pan Am wasn't necessarily advocating for joining Snake Nation, she fought Saul tooth and nail over his ideas. She was just as bullheaded and just as stubborn as Saul. While Pan Am herself didn't have many other solutions, she echoed the sentiments of the family at large, that it was better to struggle on their own terms than to submit to corpo overlords. But Saul would not budge. It is a classic case of rock meets hard place. And so Pan Am left her family for a time, headed into Night City to live the life of a merc. She actually got into the afterlife working under Rogue, often pairing up with supposed fellow nomad Nash Bane. But this all went downhill when Nash turned out to be a wraith, and he stole her Thornton and took their cargo for a job they were gonna do, leaving Pan Am hung out to dry. The first time we see Pan Am is in the afterlife. Pan Am is giving Rogue hell, and you understand why. She had no idea she was working with a wraith, and Rogue had no sympathy for her situation whatsoever. But despite Rogue's indifference to Pan Am's struggles, even Rogue admits that Pan Am is a very competent mercenary, even if she's mouthy and impulsive and kind of annoying. Rogue connects V with this trusty, vibrant nomad in order to help them get a hold of the root of all of V's current problems. Anders Hellman, the creator of the relic. But of course, no plan in this game ever goes 100% smooth. When we meet with Pan Am, she's working on a junky car that she nabbed to replace her stolen wheels. And you can tell almost immediately that Night City is not the place for her. Pan Am is frustrated with Rogue, with the car, with the morally bankrupt ways of Night City. Nomad life with the ALLLLLs is a far cry from the life that a street kid or Corpo V would have been used to. Pan Am's experience in Night City has been a rude awakening. Pan Am left her family out of frustration, and you can tell that this absence eats away at her. But she found herself at a loss for how else to handle her anger at Saul and his inability to listen to other opinions. I think a large part of Pan Am's struggle to meet in the middle with Saul, and I think this is also a thing he struggles with too, is that they both have a difficult time being vulnerable. And I don't just mean emotionally vulnerable. These two people, as we see throughout our quests with them, are extremely stubborn and very set in their ways of thinking. They're both argumentative and they can get fired up really quick. I'll dig into this more as we go, but I think it's really worth noting right now that Panam and Saul are super similar. Panam offers her assistance in helping us get Hellman in exchange for us helping her get her car back. V agrees and joins her, while Panam makes a stop at the ALLLLL camp to see if she can get some help from her old friends. But Saul gave orders that no one is to help her. But that doesn't mean that Mitch and Scorpion are not above giving an indirect hand to Panam, letting her loot her stuff from around the camp. But the way Panam trudges around camp after this and picks up all that stuff has the same feeling as a kid who just moved out, who needed some help from mom and dad, but was told they were on their own. It feels a bit petty. The other ALLLLLs in the camp still acknowledge her, however. Many of them ask if she's gonna come back. If anything, I'm willing to bet that many saw her as the only advocate they had for their own opinions, and the only other person who was strong enough to go up against Saul. Panam and V get her truck back, taking out a bunch of wraiths in the process, but Panam wants to go one step further. She wants to take out Nash. She wants her revenge. Nash is a really interesting point to note about Nomad's strength. As we see through Panam and Saul, this strength can come from and end up in a good place. But Nash, in being in charge of a bunch of wraiths, shows how it can be warped into something ugly. Wraiths are almost always the worst of the worst. Murderers, abusers, take your pick. They take what they want from whoever they want, and they don't care who they harm. I think it's important to note these two sides of this kind of strength, but also to take a look at Panam's desire for vengeance. While sure, taking out the Raffen is always great, Panam has very strong impulses and she often feeds into them, namely in the beginning of these quests. And that, in and of itself, can be a very dangerous thing. Not to say that Panam is anywhere near to being like the Wraiths, but when you look at someone like Nash, you can see what happens when you lean hard into your desires. After taking out Nash, Panam makes it a point to call Rogue, where she gloats about how she's won and she's got the cargo and blah blah blah. But Rogue bruises Panam's pride by not even caring and calling her out on how her impulsiveness has landed her in this situation, how it's not always worth chasing. This is an interesting point for Rogue, in my opinion, because as we see in some of the endings, Rogue joins you in raiding Arasaka Tower. You could absolutely argue that this was done on impulse and out of emotion, but at the same time, Rogue has seen how being impulsive can lead you down a bad path. Look at what happened to Johnny. This lesson could have been how she remained alive for so long. Being strategic. I just think it's interesting because it definitely can look like Rogue is being a hypocrite here, but this piece of advice is really important for Panam, as we see later on. Either way, Panam is pretty miffed by Rogue here, and V can actually comment on Panam's distaste for authority figures. It's our first glimpse into her past frustrations with Saul. Panam grates against authority, and I definitely think this is due to her independent upbringing. And this independence is what has allowed nomads to survive. So it's not at all a bad trait to have. But Panam struggles with her own emotions and managing them. She is still angry about Saul, and she gets even more riled when she feels she has been failed yet again by another authority figure. But I will say that I think that Rogue busting Panam's balls here was a really important moment for her character. Rogue is not in the wrong for telling Panam to clean up her own mess. She's not wrong calling Panam out on her greatest weakness, her impulsiveness. Is this nice? Is it fair? Maybe not. But I do think that Panam takes this to heart, in the sense that her plans following the Hellman mission tend to have more careful and thoughtful planning from there on out. But we'll get to that. I also think it comes down to the simple fact that Panam is not congruent with Night City. Someone's word doesn't mean anything here. It's void. It's nothing. Not even cash is a guarantee of fairness. Night City is a snake pit. The ALLLLLs are a family. The afterlife is a business. Panam is just trying to eke out an independent existence. She doesn't want fame. She's not motivated by that. And she's realizing very quickly that this life is not for her. Panam helps us get Hellman through a crazy plan that actually manages to work, even if it requires some snappy improvisation. Panam is quick on the fly, and she's very clever. She can adapt in a flash, and it is awesome to see. But Panam didn't account for her fellow ALLLLLs and friends, Mitch and Scorpion, going to check out the crash. She didn't expect her comms to fail due to the rusty specs of her old Thornton, rendering her unable to warn them that the people on board were Kang Tao. Panam and V arrive at the crash site too late to save everybody. Despite being injured, Panam fights with us to save Mitch, though Panam is devastated to find out about the loss of Scorpion. Panam blames herself for the deaths of her family members, though Mitch, the only survivor, does not for a single second. This is the first moment where we really get to see the very rare kind of familial bond that exists among the ALLLLLs. Mitch's first concern is Panam and her injury, and making sure that she's okay when he's almost been kidnapped and shot and killed. I also can't help but wonder here if Panam remembers how Cassidy arrived in the nick of time to save her best friend all those years ago, when compared to her own failure to do so now. You can see Panam harboring some deep self-doubt here, and there's some conflicting questions going through her head. Panam, despite her grief and her injuries, joins us in getting Hellman back and taking out Kang Tao in revenge for the Fallen. In fact, even if we ditch Panam and don't even help her at the AV, she still shows up at the gas station where we find Hellman, with all the ALLLLLs, having rescued Mitch herself. Because, for Panam, her word means something. Loyalty means everything. V first meets Saul here, and Saul scolds Panam for her role in Scorpion's death. While V and Mitch can defend her, Saul makes it clear that an ALLLL is always responsible for their own actions. Panam feels hopeless and lost, especially when Saul threatens casting her out completely, though Mitch does reveal that this is more or less hot air. It's Mitch who tells us that Saul was the one who rallied everybody to come and rescue Panam. Saul was genuinely concerned for Panam's safety. After the ALLLLs depart, Panam heads back to Night City. She continues doing mercenary work and hemming and hawing about whether or not she should go back to her clan. Scorpion's death hangs over her, as well as her role in it. Panam reaches out to V through text, expressing her own doubts and confusion. Panam is torn between creating change herself and simply hoping for it. Is she not good enough to do anything right? Is she incapable of listening to others, like Saul? Was Rogue right, imparting some useful honesty for this merc who she herself admits is great in spite of her flaws? But despite her conflict, Panam comes rushing home as soon as word comes through that Saul is missing. The ALLLLs have lost their leader, and nobody is really sure on how to handle the situation. Saul's been taken by Raffen, and the ALLLLs, for one thing, can't afford all-out combat. They can't leave their camp undefended, as they've already lost a lot of numbers due to the Wraiths. And so Panam, with V's help and Mitch's drone, manages to free Saul from the clutches of the Raffen. Panam doesn't care about the limits or the dangers. Panam knows that Saul went to the wall for her, and so Panam would absolutely go to any extent to save Saul. After Saul's rescue, they hole up in an abandoned farmhouse. With a sandstorm raging outside, Panam and Saul bicker like family. They still struggle to agree about the clan's future. But when Saul says he's going to bed, Panam sasses him and he sasses her. Saul is still comfortable enough with Panam to make that remark about haboobs. Even if there's some trouble in the Aldecaldo leadership structure, it's still sort of like that semi-toxic yet loving family structure. The next day, Panam decides to rejoin her old clan. Despite the differences she and Saul still have, Saul invited Panam back himself. As Panam rides off into the sunrise, you know that the debate of the clan's future has not ended here. But at the very least, Panam is now going back to where, in her heart, she knows she belongs, and a bit wiser for her experiences in the meantime. As expected, Panam has new ideas and new gumption. Panam has spent enough time around the Corpo hotbed of Night City to know that the clan should stay as far from corporate leashes as possible. The clan, with the influx of Wraith attacks and Saul's kidnapping, needs to be able to better stand on its own. And many of her people agree, even if they do so quietly. Behind Saul's back, Panam and Mitch locate a Militech convoy, carrying a basilisk tank. An insane piece of firepower that would provide a lot of safety and peace of mind for the clan going forward. But Saul is vehemently against anybody going near it. The last thing the clan needs in their current condition is to make an enemy out of Militech. And so Panam calls V back to camp to fill them in on her big plan to get the tank. And she's also supported by some of the other clan members, Carol, Cassidy, and Mitch among them. So long as V is loyal and doesn't rat out their plan to steal the basilisk, the plan goes off without a hitch. They get the tank, and they leave the convoy vehicles next to a Raffen camp to shift the blame. The next day, the tank actually repels a Raffen ambush when V and Panam are in the middle of taking it out for a test drive. They save the Aldecaldo's camp, and even Saul cannot deny that Panam made the right call. And it's following this event that, to Panam's shock, Saul names her co-leader of the Aldecaldos. Saul also admits that he was going about things wrong, echoing his own sentiments that every Aldecaldo needs to take responsibility for their own actions and mistakes. And also, Saul recognizes in Panam what is also a very important trait about himself. Both Saul and Panam are willing to risk everything for the good of the clan. Saul and Panam were both willing to risk everything to save each other. Both learned to overcome their own personal hurdles to meet in the middle. For Panam, her own self-doubt and uncertainty. And for Saul, his tunnel vision and one-track mindset. While Panam can also possess a limited viewpoint, she and Saul together are a great pair. They both balance each other out, and I think with time could really understand each other. And they both care about each other and everybody in the family. For both of them, it is not about holding on to power, it is about doing the best possible thing for the Aldecaldos. Even Saul's acceptance of Panam's strength here is a very important plot point for the both of them, because Saul is leading by example here. He takes to heart the opinions of others, finally. Something incredibly important, and something I think he remembered how to do because of Panam. But Panam can also take from this the wisdom that comes with admitting when you're wrong. something that Panam really struggles with. To be vulnerable like that is no easy thing. It's interesting how a fear of vulnerability can really stunt a person. How a fear of an uncomfortable conversation can drive a wedge in there that doesn't need to be there in the first place. However, there is another aspect at play here. One that Panam isn't super well versed with. Saul is playing politics. But before we get into this bit, let's discuss what I think is V's best romance. Panam's. Panam's romance, I think, is the best romance for V, and it really is quite sweet, especially when you pair it with the star ending. Panam herself even says to V that she's not comfortable with tenderness, or expressing a more vulnerable side, but she wants to try to do that for V. That's one reason why she sort of takes things slow with V. Panam's whole quest line surrounds growth and vulnerability. Saul does that through admitting he was wrong. Panam does this through her romance with V, as well as her more subtle changes to how she acts throughout the story. And V can choose to carry on this torch, specifically in the course of the star ending, which is, without a doubt, the best ending for V. As a character, V kinda seems more independent and not given to asking for help, even when Panam says that whenever V might need her, she will be there. So if V does the hard thing and chooses to call Panam for help, she is there. Panam is there, no hesitation, basically no questions asked, aside from where am I picking you up and where are we going? Loyalty is an ALLLLL specialty, and there is no way that Panam would ever leave V out to dry, romanced or not. And the same goes for her family. On the surface, Saul knows that if Panam ever struck out again on her own, there was a huge risk of a fracture, splitting the clan in two. And that could very well spell disaster for a lot of people. While I do believe that Saul sees a lot of potential in Panam, he's also motivated to raise her up because of more subtle reasons. In the star ending, Saul can actually pull V aside and admit that he's not helping them out of kindness and loyalty, like he sort of advertises. He's doing this for Panam, and by extension, the clan. He knows Panam would leave if he turned his back on V, and the clan needs to be united. He recognizes the gravity of the situation that he's bringing his people into, but he knows the clan's fate is even worse if they split. Panam herself is also sort of weirded out by Saul's very sudden agreement with everything she says in this ending, but she's not as politically minded as he is. She's a straight shooter, so she doesn't know what to make of it. This is also why so many people among the ALLLLLs like her and respect her. What you see is what you get. Panam is incredibly nervous about leading, especially in this raid on Arasaka, and she doesn't want to let her people down. Even to a V that she's simply friends with, she shows this vulnerability, which to me demonstrates that she's definitely a good person for a leadership role. But you kind of feel a little uneasy at what you know about Saul's motives, especially considering how the other clan members have reservations about how the two have been cooperating. Like, is this a sign of bad things to come? Or is this a sign that Panam could someday learn some of Saul's tactics and become a better leader because of it? Also, the veterans, like Carol, Teddy, and Bob, can actually explain to V that Saul is using the raid on Mikoshi as an opportunity. The clan will be able to get some wicked tech from Arasaka, which will make them lots of eddies. And while this might undermine this ending's nice moments, like Saul making V and ALLLLL, it doesn't undermine Panam's joy in you joining her family. Whether you're romancing her or you're just friends with her, she is literally ride or die for you. She's the only romance option to go to bat to join you in the ending. And you don't even have to romance her, you just have to show your own loyalty and friendship throughout the game. And it's so important to realize that over the course of the game's story, V has lost so much. V has lost their closest friend, their hopes and dreams, their future. The star ending is the only ending that, in my opinion, gives more to V than it takes. Panam and Saul join V in raiding Arasaka Tower, until they reach the doors of Mikoshi. Here, a wild Atom Smasher appears, but Saul blows his chest piece to bits with his shotgun, point blank, giving V and Panam the advantage that they need to beat him. All before Atom Smasher stomps Saul's head into a puddle, his final words being that of the name of his clan. Panam screams bloody murder, and together you avenge Saul's death, as you should. For me, Saul's death is the saddest in the whole game. It was even sadder for me than Jackie. This guy went out like a champion. And with his final breath, he declares his undying loyalty to his family. And it's doubly horrible because Panam is destroyed by this. She basically just watched her big brother figure get, like, squished. Auburn style times 10. And by Night City's most bloodthirsty psychopath, you feel horrible for her. From there on out, the ending where V then returns to their body is the only ending where Panam sticks with V. In the star ending, you leave Night City with Panam and the ALLLLL. And Judy, if you romance Judy and you're playing female V, she can come too. But whether or not you romance Panam, you know that she and her family will do everything they possibly can to at least ensure that V's final days are spent in comfort, and also to try and find a cure or a fix if any such thing exists. V can now, at least, live the remainder of their days enveloped in the strength of a group who has the guts to care. And I also want to say, it makes so much sense story-wise that V would advocate to Panam to return home to the ALLLLL, given how little of that warmth that V has in their life. How Night City is so empty and cold. And in turn, with V helping to guide Panam back home, she gives V the opportunity to have a family too. But of course, the other endings have a lot of important things to note about Panam. For starters, if you do leave Mikoshi with Johnny in V's body, Panam swears vengeance. Whether or not she'd actually carry it out is another matter. I think Panam would be too shattered if faced with V's body. In the Sun and Devil endings, no matter what, Panam always leaves Night City with the ALLLLL, and Saul is still alive. But the ending that hurts the most in regards to Panam is the Phantom Liberty one. V was in a coma for 2 years, and Panam tried to reach them, but understandably never got any word. Whether you romance her or not, when you try to call her and let her know you're alive, she refuses to speak to you. Panam can hold a grudge before the end of her quests, and she can certainly still hold one now. The biggest ouch of this whole ending is that Mitch is the one who calls V, to tell V that Panam does not want to talk to them and that they should not attempt to contact her again. So in conclusion, the star ending is definitely the best ending for V. And it's all because of love and family and vulnerability. You can't be strong without being a bit weak, and in the end, humans are stronger together. Otherwise, we never would have found our way around those campfires back when we lived in caves. Panam is, in my opinion, a character that on the surface doesn't seem to grow that much. She doesn't really seem to have any overt development, and at first I didn't like this, but I actually talked to my boyfriend about this point before making this video, and he explained how he felt that Panam's lack of blatant, obvious development was actually very fitting for her character, and it made a lot of sense to me. Panam's development is less obvious, but it is there. It's quiet, but it's loud in the way she then conducts herself after her big mistakes, such as with calling Rogue to gloat, or ending up sort of blaming herself for Scorpion's death. As she admits in her romance, Panam is not good at admitting her feelings. She is not the type of person who easily admits that she was wrong. She's definitely an actions over words type of person. But I also have to say that while I think that the star ending is the best, nicest ending for V, I think it's not the best ending for Panam and the ALLLLL as a whole. And it's not because I think V is a bad influence or anything, or that V's death is going to affect everybody negatively, or something bad is going to happen. It's because of Saul being dead in that ending. While I do think that Panam will someday grow into a very, very capable leader, I think the best, most effective way that that would have come about is if Saul was there to continuously mentor her. While Saul has his faults, he is, at least to me, an older version of Panam, a wiser version. Panam describes to us, when we go to rescue Saul from the Wraiths, all the crazy stuff he used to do when she was a kid. He was reckless, and he did what he wanted, no matter how dangerous it was. If it was for the clan, then it was worth it. Panam is much the same, and I think that's why they both butt heads so much, and also why Saul decides to raise her up as co-leader. He sees in her that powerful fire that can blaze the way for his family. I think Saul would have been a huge help on that path for everybody. Saul is more of a forethinking character than Panam because he's had a lot more time to get his impulsive nature under control. He's not perfect, but he was already setting a good example for Panam in admitting that he was wrong, and not letting his pride get in the way of helping her become a better leader, of doing what's best for the clan. As much as I enjoy the star ending, especially if you get Judy to go with you, it's very sweet, I cannot say it's my favorite. For that reason. I'm also somebody who thinks Phantom Liberty's ending is the best ending for the game, which I know not everybody agrees with that. Maybe I just like seeing characters suffer. Something's wrong with me.